Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Logan Everett, and I've been with the FBI's Tampa field office for 11 years now. Over those years, I've worked everything from organized crime to human trafficking, violent fugitives to drug cartels operating out of the Everglades. I thought I knew Florida. I thought I understood the particular brand of darkness that festers in the humid air down here, in the places where civilization ends and the swamp begins. But nothing in my training, nothing in my experience, prepared me for what happened in Collier County during the winter of 2023. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in February. I was at my desk, finishing up paperwork on a closed case involving a meth distribution ring we'd busted the month before, when my supervisor, Janet Harlow, knocked on my door frame. Janet was a 15-year veteran with the Bureau, the kind of woman who'd seen it all and wasn't easily rattled. But that morning, I noticed something different in her expression. Not fear, exactly. More like uncertainty. "Dalton, got something weird for you," she said, holding a yellow sticky note in her hand. "Collier County Sheriff's Office needs assistance with a missing person case. Guy named Raymond Vance, commercial fisherman, disappeared 3 days ago near Chokoloskee. But there's something off about it." She paused, reading from the note. "Witness claims he saw Vance walking on water in the mangroves," or something like that. I looked up from my computer screen. Walking on water? That's what the deputy said. I know it sounds crazy, but the sheriff specifically requested federal assistance. They've got a witness, some boat tour operator, who swears he saw something impossible. And apparently there's video footage. She handed me the sticky note with the sheriff's contact information. "I want you to drive down there today. Take a look, see if there's anything to it. If it's just some drunk fisherman who fell overboard, we'll hand it back to local PD. But if there's more to it, trafficking, organized crime, anything federal, it's ours." I took the note and glanced at the name scrawled on it. Deputy Marshal Vance. No relation to the missing man, apparently, and a phone number with a 239 area code. Collier County. That was down in the deep southwest, where the Everglades meet the Gulf of Mexico, where the 10,000 islands spread out like a labyrinth of mangrove forests and shallow channels. It was beautiful country if you were a tourist. If you were law enforcement, it was a nightmare. Endless hiding spots, limited access, and wildlife that could kill you as easily as any armed suspect. "I'll head down there this afternoon," I said. "Should I take Martinez with me?" Janet shook her head. "He's testifying in federal court all week. You're on your own for this one. Besides, it's probably nothing. Just keep me posted." I nodded and watched her leave. Then I pulled up a map of Collier County on my computer. Chokoloskee was a small fishing village on the edge of Everglades National Park. Population maybe 400 people. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where outsiders stood out, and where the only law enforcement presence was a single sheriff's deputy who probably spent most of his time dealing with drunk fishermen and the occasional domestic dispute. If something genuinely strange was happening down there, it would have taken a lot for the locals to reach out to the FBI. They tended to keep to themselves. I spent the next hour making calls, gathering what little information was available. Raymond Vance, age 47, had been a commercial stone crab fisherman for over 20 years. Lived alone in a small house near the Chokoloskee Marina. No criminal record, no history of mental illness, no known enemies. He'd been reported missing by his business partner, a man named Curtis Holloway, after Vance failed to show up for 2 consecutive days of work. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. Fishermen sometimes took unscheduled days off. But Holloway had found Vance's truck still parked at the marina, with the keys in the ignition and Vance's wallet sitting on the dashboard. That was the first red flag. The second red flag was the witness statement from a man named Garrett Maddox, who ran fishing tours out of Everglades City. According to the initial report, Maddox had been guiding a group of tourists through the mangrove channels near the 10,000 Islands around sunset on the day Vance disappeared. He'd filmed part of the tour on his phone for promotional purposes, and in the footage, there appeared to be a figure moving through the mangroves in a way that didn't make sense. The deputy's notes described it as possibly walking on the surface of the water, or moving in a manner inconsistent with normal human locomotion. Those were odd words for a small-town deputy to use. It made me think he'd been struggling to describe something he didn't understand. By noon, I was on the road. The drive from Tampa to Chokoloskee was about 3 hours, mostly on I-75 South, which the locals called Alligator Alley for good reason. The highway cut straight through the heart of the Everglades, 100 miles of flat, empty wetland stretching out on both sides. Occasionally, I'd see an alligator sunning itself on the roadside or a cluster of vultures picking at roadkill. The sky was a washed-out gray, threatening rain, and the air had that heavy, humid quality that made everything feel oppressive. It was the kind of weather that made you sweat even with the air conditioning on full blast. As I drove, I thought about what Janet had said. Walking on water. It was absurd, of course. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe Vance had been standing on a shallow sandbar, and from a distance it looked like he was walking on the surface. Maybe the witness had been mistaken, or the video was distorted. Maybe Vance had been on a boat, and the lighting made it look strange. There were a dozen explanations that made more sense than the impossible. But there was something in Janet's voice that stuck with me. That uncertainty. She'd been doing this job long enough to know when something didn't add up, and she'd sent me down here because she thought it was worth a closer look. That meant she didn't buy the simple explanations either. I reached Everglades City around 3 in the afternoon. The town was small, just a handful of buildings clustered around the marina, with a scattering of houses and trailers set back from the water. Everything had that weathered, sun-bleached look that comes from constant exposure to salt and humidity. The smell of fish and diesel fuel hung in the air, mixing with the sweet, rotting odor of the mangroves. A couple of fishing boats were tied up at the docks, their captains working on their nets or hosing down the decks. Nobody paid me much attention as I drove through town. Chokoloskee was another 10 minutes down the road, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that crossed over a stretch of shallow bay. The village sat on a low island, barely above sea level, surrounded by mangrove forests and tidal creeks. I could see why people came here. It had a raw, untouched beauty, but it also felt isolated, cut off from the rest of the world. Like a place where things could happen and no one would ever know. I found the sheriff's substation easily enough. It was a small, cinder-block building near the marina, with a single patrol car parked out front. I pulled in next to it and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant cry of seabirds. The sky was darker now, the clouds pressing down like a lid on a pot. The air smelled like rain. Deputy Marshal Vance was waiting for me inside. He was a big man in his mid-50s with a sunburned face and hands that looked like they'd spent more time on a fishing boat than behind a desk. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, and gestured for me to sit down in one of the folding chairs across from his desk. "Appreciate you coming down, Agent Everett," he said. His voice had that slow, measured quality of someone who'd grown up in rural Florida. I know this whole thing probably sounds crazy, but I wanted federal eyes on it before we went any further. Raymond Vance is a good man. Been part of this community for over 20 years. This ain't like him. I pulled out my notepad. Tell me what you've got so far. Start with the basics. When was he last seen? Vance leaned back in his chair. Last confirmed sighting was Saturday morning, around 6 a.m. Curtis Holloway saw him loading gear into his boat at the marina. They were supposed to head out together to check their crab traps, but Curtis said Raymond wanted to make a solo run first. Said he had a spot he wanted to check on his own. Curtis didn't think much of it. Raymond did that sometimes, but when Raymond didn't show up at their usual meeting spot by noon, Curtis tried calling him. Phone went straight to voicemail. When did Curtis report him missing? Sunday evening, after he'd been by Raymond's house and found nobody home. Raymond's truck was still at the marina, keys in the ignition, wallet on the dash. That's when Curtis knew something was wrong. Raymond wouldn't just walk away from his truck like that. And his boat was still at the dock, too, tied up exactly where Curtis had seen it Saturday morning. I frowned. Wait, his boat was still there? So he never actually went out on the water? Deputy Vance shook his head. That's what we thought at first. But when we checked the boat, the engine was still warm, and there was mud and seaweed on the deck, fresh stuff. Someone had taken that boat out recently. We're thinking Raymond went out Saturday morning like he planned, then came back to the dock and disappeared. Left everything behind. Didn't even lock up his boat. Any signs of a struggle? Blood? Anything that might indicate foul play? Nothing. Boat was clean. Truck was clean. We searched his house top to bottom. No forced entry, no evidence of violence. It's like he just walked away from his life. The deputy paused, rubbing his jaw. But then we talked to Garrett Maddox, the tour guide. Right. Garrett runs fishing and birding tours out of Everglades City. He was out with a group of tourists Saturday evening, around sunset, in the mangrove channels west of here. Said he was filming some of the scenery on his phone for his website when he saw something strange. Deputy Vance reached into a drawer and pulled out a phone in a plastic evidence bag. This is Garrett's phone. I've got the video queued up. Take a look. He slid the phone across the desk. I picked it up, pulled it out of the bag, and pressed play on the video. The footage was shaky, shot from a moving boat, but the quality was decent. I could see the narrow channel of dark water cutting through the dense mangrove forest, the twisted roots rising up out of the shallows like skeletal fingers. The light was golden and fading, that brief window just before sunset, when everything takes on an orange glow. Garrett's voice narrated in the background, pointing out a roseate spoonbill perched in the trees. Then, about 30 seconds in, the camera panned to the left, and I saw it. There was a figure moving through the mangroves, maybe 100 yards away. At first, it looked like someone in a small boat, threading through the narrow passages between the trees. But as I watched, I realized there was no boat. The figure was upright, human-shaped, moving with a steady, purposeful stride. And it appeared to be moving across the surface of the water. I paused the video and zoomed in. The image was grainy, pixelated from the digital zoom, but I could make out enough detail to see that the figure was wearing what looked like a dark jacket and pants. The face was obscured by shadow and distance, and beneath the figure, where feet should have been, there was just the flat black surface of the water. I let the video continue. Garrett's narration had stopped. I could hear him breathing hard, muttering something under his breath. The camera followed the figure for maybe 10 more seconds before it disappeared behind a cluster of mangrove trees. Then the video ended. I set the phone down. What did Garrett say when you questioned him? He swears it was a person. Said it looked exactly like someone walking, but on top of the water. Said it didn't make any sense, but that's what he saw. Deputy Vance leaned forward. Now, I've lived here my whole life, Agent Everett. I know these waters. I know how light plays tricks on you at sunset, how shadows and reflections can make you see things that aren't there. But I also know Garrett Maddox. He's not a bullshitter. He's not the kind of guy who makes things up for attention. And when I watched that video, I saw the same thing he did. I picked up the phone again and watched the video a second time, then a third. Each time, I tried to find the rational explanation. Maybe the figure was standing on a hidden sandbar or a submerged log. Maybe it was a trick of perspective, and the person was actually in a low-profile kayak that blended with the water. Maybe the video was doctored, though that seemed unlikely given the circumstances. But no matter how many times I watched it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was genuinely wrong with what I was seeing. The movement was too smooth, too steady. The figure didn't bob or sway the way someone in a boat would. It just moved forward in a straight line, as if walking on solid ground. "Did you search the area where this was filmed?" I asked. "We did. Took an airboat out there Sunday morning and combed through those channels for hours. Didn't find anything. No boat, no tracks, no sign anyone had been there." "What about Raymond's boat? Did you find any connection between where he was working and where this figure was spotted?" Deputy Vance nodded slowly. "That's the thing. We pulled Raymond's GPS log from his boat's navigation system. Turns out he'd been working in that exact area Saturday morning. His traps are set in the channels west of Chokoloskee, same stretch of mangroves where Garrett saw the figure. Last recorded position was about 200 yards from where that video was filmed." I felt a cold trickle of unease run down my spine. So Raymond was in the area, and a few hours later, someone, or something, is spotted moving through the same mangroves in a way that doesn't make sense. "That's about the size of it," Deputy Vance said. "Could be coincidence. Could be Raymond saw something that spooked him, or got himself tangled up in something illegal. We've had problems with drug runners using these waters as a transit route. Or it could be something else entirely. That's why I called you folks." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had started to fall, a steady drizzle that turned the world gray and blurred the line between sky and water. The marina was empty except for a few boats rocking gently in their slips. Beyond them, the mangrove forest stretched out like a dark wall, impenetrable and silent. "I want to talk to Garrett Maddox," I said, "and Curtis Holloway, and I want to see Raymond's boat and his house. If there's something here, I'll find it." "I'll make the calls," Deputy Vance said. "But Agent Everett, one more thing." He hesitated, as if weighing how much to say. "Raymond kept a log, not an official one, just a little notebook where he wrote down coordinates and notes about his traps. We found it in his boat. Most of it's pretty standard stuff, dates, locations, catch counts. But the last few entries..." He trailed off. "What about them?" "They're strange, rambling. Like he was trying to describe something but couldn't quite find the words." The deputy opened a file folder and pulled out a photocopy of a page covered in hurried handwriting. This was the last entry, dated Saturday morning. "About 2 hours before the GPS says he headed back to the dock." I took the page and read. "February 18th, 2023, 8:47 a.m. Channel 4, west of Rabbit Key. Something in the water. Not sure what. Saw it twice now, always at the edge of the mangroves where the light doesn't reach. Moves wrong. Sounds wrong. Almost like breathing, but not. Checked the trap. Empty again. Third time this week. Something's pulling them up. Something knows where they are. Followed the channel north to where it splits. Saw it again. Closer this time. Looked like a man, maybe. Stood there in the shallows, just stood there, didn't move. I killed the engine, watched for maybe 5 minutes. Then it turned its head, Jesus Christ, the way it turned, and it saw me. I'm sure of it. I started the engine and got the hell out. Don't think I'm going back there. Don't think I want to know what it is. I read the entry again, slowly. The handwriting was shaky in places, as if Raymond had been writing quickly or his hand had been trembling. The tone was urgent, almost frightened. This wasn't the kind of thing a rational man would write unless something had genuinely scared him. "Did you find anything else in the boat?" I asked. "Maps, coordinates, anything that might tell us exactly where he was." "Just the GPS log. We've got the coordinates." Deputy Vance pulled out a nautical chart and spread it on the desk. He'd marked several locations with red X's. "These are the spots where Raymond's traps were set. And this," he pointed to a location near the western edge of the mangrove forest, "is where the GPS shows his last recorded position before he headed back." I studied the map. The area was a maze of narrow channels and small islands, all covered in dense mangrove forest. The water was shallow, only a few feet deep in most places, and the bottom was soft mud that would make walking nearly impossible. Yet, according to the video, someone had been moving through that exact area without a boat. "I'm going out there," I said. "Tomorrow morning. Can you arrange for a boat?" "I can take you myself," Deputy Vance said. "I know those waters better than anyone." I nodded. "Good. And I want to see the video one more time tonight. And I want to interview Garrett Maddox in person. If there's something on that footage we're missing, I want to know what it is." By the time I left the sheriff's substation, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still dark and heavy. I drove to the small motel on the edge of Chokoloskee, a rundown place called the Gulf Breeze Inn that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The room was clean enough, but it smelled of mildew and old cigarette smoke, and the air conditioner rattled like it was on its last legs. I didn't care. I'd stayed in worse places. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing the case file and making notes. The more I read Raymond Vance's journal entry, the more unsettled I felt. There was a desperation in those words, a fear that felt genuine. And the detail about the figure turning its head, Jesus Christ the way it turned, stuck with me. What had Raymond seen that had frightened him so badly? Around 9 p.m., I called Janet to update her. She listened without interrupting as I laid out everything I'd learned so far. "So, what's your read on this?" she asked when I finished. "Is it drugs, human trafficking, or something else?" I hesitated. "I don't know yet. The video is strange, but videos can be misleading. Could be a dozen explanations. What bothers me more is the journal entry. Raymond Vance was scared of something, scared enough to write about it, scared enough to consider abandoning his traps. That's not the behavior of a man caught up in drug running or organized crime. That's someone who saw something they couldn't explain. You think he's dead? I think he's missing, and I think whatever scared him might have had something to do with it. Tomorrow, I'm going out to the site with the local deputy. We'll see what's there." "Be careful," Janet said. "I don't like the feel of this one." "Neither do I admitted. "But I've dealt with weird cases before. There's always a rational explanation. We just have to find it." After I hung up, I tried to sleep, but the humid air and the sounds of the night kept me awake. Through the thin walls of the motel, I could hear the rhythmic chirping of frogs and insects, a constant droning noise that seemed to press in from all sides. And beneath that, something else. A low, distant sound, almost like breathing. I told myself it was just the wind moving through the mangroves, or the tide shifting in the channels. But it took a long time before I finally drifted off. I met Deputy Vance at the marina just after sunrise. The sky was overcast again, the clouds hanging low and gray, and the water had that flat, oily quality that comes before a storm. The deputy was already on his boat, a flat-bottomed aluminum skiff with an outboard motor, checking the fuel and gear. He nodded when he saw me approaching down the dock. "Morning, Agent Everett. You sleep okay?" "Well enough," I lied. The truth was, I'd barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure from the video, moving across the water with that strange, impossible stride, and I kept hearing Raymond Vance's words in my head, the way it turned. "Brought some extra supplies," Deputy Vance said, gesturing to a cooler and a couple of emergency kits stowed in the boat. "Weather's supposed to turn later today. If we get caught in a squall out there, it can get nasty fast. Also, brought my sidearm, just in case. You carrying?" I patted the holster on my hip. Always. We loaded into the boat and cast off. The engine coughed to life with a plume of blue smoke, and then we were moving, threading our way through the marina and out into the open water. The air was cooler on the water, but the humidity was still oppressive, clinging to my skin like a second layer. Within minutes, my shirt was damp with sweat. As we left the village behind, the landscape transformed. The orderly world of docks and houses gave way to the wild, primal beauty of the mangroves. The trees rose up on either side of the channel, their roots arching out of the water like the legs of enormous spiders. The water itself was dark and murky, stained brown by tannins from the decaying vegetation. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of movement, a heron taking flight, or the ripple of something just beneath the surface. "This is Vance's territory," the deputy shouted over the engine noise, pointing to the maze of channels ahead of us. "He's been working these waters his whole life. Knows every inlet, every sandbar, every drop-off. If anyone could navigate this place blindfolded, it's him. Makes it all the stranger that he disappeared," I said. "Exactly." We traveled west for maybe 20 minutes, following a narrow channel that twisted and turned through the mangrove forest. The further we went, the more isolated I felt. The trees closed in around us, blocking out most of the sky, and the sounds of civilization faded until all I could hear was the drone of the engine and the occasional cry of a bird. It was easy to see how someone could disappear out here. The Everglades were vast, endless. You could search for weeks and never find a trace of a missing person. Finally, Deputy Vance cut the engine and let the boat drift. We were in a slightly wider section of the channel, where the water opened up into a small basin surrounded by mangroves on all sides. He consulted his GPS unit, then pointed to the trees on our left. "This is it." According to Raymond's GPS log, his last recorded position was right about here. "And if you look over there," he pointed to a gap in the mangroves about 50 yards away, "that's the channel where Garrett Maddox filmed that video." Figure was moving somewhere in that direction. I stood up carefully, trying not to rock the boat, and scanned the area. From here, it looked like any other stretch of the Everglades. Dark water, twisted trees, nothing but empty wilderness in every direction. But something about it felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. Even the insects seemed muted, as if they were holding their breath. "Let's check the mangroves," I said. "Look for any signs someone's been through here recently. Tracks, broken branches, anything." We pulled the boat closer to the shore, using a long push-pole to navigate the shallow water near the tree line. The bottom was soft mud, and with each push, the pole sank down several inches before finding purchase. It was slow, difficult work, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my back despite the overcast sky. As we neared the mangroves, I noticed something strange. The trees here were different from the ones we'd passed earlier. Many of the branches were bare, stripped of leaves, and the bark looked blackened and diseased. Some of the roots had a strange glossy sheen to them, as if they'd been coated with oil, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable. like rotting fish mixed with something chemical. "What's wrong with these trees?" I asked. Deputy Vance frowned. "Not sure. Could be saltwater intrusion, storm damage, disease. Mangroves are tough, but they're not invincible. Sea levels have been rising, messing with the salinity balance. Could be killing off some of the vegetation. Or it could be pollution, chemical runoff from somewhere. Maybe, but I haven't heard of any industrial activity in this area. Everglades National Park is pretty strict about that stuff." I reached out and touched one of the roots. The glossy substance came off on my fingers, thick and slightly sticky. I sniffed it cautiously. It didn't smell like oil. It smelled organic, biological, like decay. "Let's check the GPS coordinates more carefully," I said, wiping my hand on my pants. "I want to see exactly where Raymond was when he made that last journal entry." We pulled up the coordinates on the GPS and compared them to our current location. We were close, but not quite at the right spot. Deputy Vance started the engine again, and we moved slowly through the channel, following the GPS reading until we reached a point about 100 yards deeper into the mangroves. Here, the channel narrowed to barely the width of the boat, and the trees pressed in so close I could have reached out and touched them on both sides. "This is it," the deputy said, checking the GPS again. "This is where Raymond was when he marked those coordinates." I looked around. We were in a section of the mangroves where the canopy overhead was so thick that almost no light penetrated. The water was nearly black, and the air felt heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of place that made your instincts scream at you to leave, to get back into open water where you could see danger coming. And then I saw the trap. It was floating just ahead of us. A wire cage about 3 feet square designed to catch stone crabs. But something was wrong with it. The door was open and the bait inside was gone, but the trap itself looked like it had been torn apart from the inside. The wire mesh was bent outward, as if something large and powerful had forced its way out. "Raymond's trap?" I asked. Deputy Vance nodded, his face pale. "Has to be. That's his marking on the buoy." He pointed to a faded red stripe on the float attached to the trap. "But I've never seen one damaged like that. Stone crabs can't do that kind of damage. Their claws are strong, but not that strong." I reached out and pulled the trap closer to the boat, examining the damage more carefully. The wire had been twisted with immense force, and some of the edges looked almost melted, as if they'd been exposed to extreme heat. More disturbing were the marks on the inside of the trap. Long, deep scratches that looked almost like claw marks, but far too large to have been made by any crab. "Something got in here," I said quietly. "Something strong enough to rip through steel wire." "Alligator?" Deputy Vance suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe, but gators don't usually mess with crab traps. And these marks," I ran my finger along one of the scratches, "these don't look like reptile claws. They're too regular, too deliberate, almost like fingers." The moment I said it, I regretted it. It sounded absurd, paranoid, but I couldn't shake the image of those scratches, gouged deep into the wire mesh. They looked human, or at least they looked like something that had hands. We spent the next 2 hours searching the area, methodically working our way through the channels and checking each of Raymond's remaining traps. All of them showed similar damage. Doors torn open, bait gone, wire twisted and bent. Whatever was raiding these traps was systematic about it, hitting every one in the same section of the mangroves. As we worked, I kept expecting to find Raymond's body. A fishing accident, a heart attack, a slip and fall into the water followed by drowning. There were a dozen ways a man could die out here alone. But we found nothing, no body, no personal effects, no signs of struggle. It was as if Raymond Vance had simply evaporated into the humid air. Around noon, we took a break and drifted in a wider section of the channel while we ate the sandwiches Deputy Vance had packed. The sky had darkened even more, and I could see flashes of lightning on the horizon. The storm was coming, just like the deputy had predicted. "What do you think is going on here?" Deputy Vance asked, breaking the silence. Honestly, I took a long drink from my water bottle, considering my answer. I think Raymond saw something that scared him. I think he came out here to check his traps and encountered something he didn't understand. Whether that something was dangerous or just strange, I don't know. But it was enough to make him write that journal entry, and it was enough to make him want to avoid this area. And the figure in the video? Could be related, could be coincidence. But if I had to guess, I'd say Raymond encountered someone or something out here that's connected to his disappearance. Someone, Deputy Vance repeated. You think this is a person, a human being? I think we have to consider all possibilities. There are people who use these mangroves as hiding places. Drug runners, fugitives, people who don't want to be found. Maybe Raymond stumbled onto something he shouldn't have seen. The deputy didn't look convinced, and honestly, I wasn't either. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but it didn't account for the video, or the damaged traps, or the strange way Raymond had described the figure in his journal. The way it turned. Those words kept echoing in my head. We finished our lunch and were about to resume the search when I heard it. A sound from somewhere in the mangroves to our left. It was faint, barely audible over the background noise of the swamp, but distinct, a rhythmic splashing, like someone, or something, moving through shallow water. Deputy Vance heard it too. He tensed, reaching for the sidearm on his hip. "You hear that?" I nodded, already moving to the front of the boat. "Kill the engine." He shut down the motor, and suddenly the world went silent except for that sound. Splash, splash, splash. It was coming from deeper in the mangroves, maybe 50 yards away, moving parallel to our position. And it was getting closer. "Could be an alligator," the deputy whispered. "Could be," I agreed. But it didn't sound like an alligator. The rhythm was too regular, too purposeful. It sounded like footsteps. I pulled out my Glock and held it low, not quite pointing it at the sound, but ready. The splashing continued for maybe 30 more seconds, getting closer and closer, and then it stopped. Just like that. Complete silence. We waited, barely breathing. 1 minute passed, then 2. The air felt electric, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. And then, through a narrow gap in the mangroves, I saw it. A shape, human-sized, standing maybe 40 yards away in the shallows. It was facing us. I was sure of it, though I couldn't make out any details. The light was too dim, and the trees obscured too much, but I could see the outline of a head, shoulders, torso, standing perfectly still in water that should have been waist-deep, possibly deeper. "Do you see that?" I whispered. "Jesus Christ," Deputy Vance breathed. Yeah, I see it." I raised my voice, projecting it across the water. "This is the FBI. Identify yourself." The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, utterly motionless. "I said, identify yourself," I repeated, louder this time. "Step into view, now." Nothing. The figure remained frozen in place, like a statue. And then, slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, it began to turn its head. Not the body, just the head, rotating to face us directly. The movement was wrong somehow, too smooth, too fluid, like a camera on a tripod rather than a human being. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to start the engine and get the hell out of there. But I held my ground, keeping my weapon trained on the figure. "We're approaching," I called out. "Do not move." Deputy Vance started the engine, and we began moving slowly toward the gap in the mangroves. But as we got closer, the figure seemed to sink. Not fall, not collapse, just sink, straight down, as if the water were swallowing it. Within seconds, it had disappeared completely beneath the surface. What the hell? Deputy Vance stopped the boat about 20 feet from where the figure had been standing. Where did it go? I scanned the water, looking for any sign of movement. Bubbles, ripples, anything. But the surface was completely still. It was as if the figure had never been there at all. Get us closer, I said. I want to check the depth here. We moved into the gap between the trees, and Deputy Vance used the push pole to measure the water depth. The pole went down 6 feet before hitting bottom, far too deep for anyone to stand in without submerging completely. And the bottom was soft mud, the kind that would make standing nearly impossible. This doesn't make any sense, the deputy said. It was standing right here. I saw it. So did I. I holstered my weapon and looked around the area, trying to find some explanation. A submerged log or sandbar that could have created the illusion of someone standing. A trick of light and shadow. But there was nothing. Just dark water and mangrove roots. And then I noticed something else. The trees around us, the ones closest to where the figure had been, they had that same diseased look I'd seen earlier. Bare branches, blackened bark, that strange glossy coating on the roots, and the smell was stronger here, that mixture of decay and chemicals that made my stomach turn. We need to get samples, I said. Water, vegetation, bottom sediment. Something's affecting this environment, and I want to know what. Deputy Vance looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Agent Everett, with all due respect, I think we should get the hell out of here. Whatever we just saw was probably someone in diving gear, I interrupted, though I didn't believe it myself. Or someone on a submerged platform. There's a rational explanation, there always is. You really believe that? I met his eyes. I have to believe that, because the alternative doesn't make any sense. We spent another hour collecting samples and documenting the area with photos and video, all while the storm grew closer. By the time we finally decided to head back, the sky was nearly black, and the wind had picked up, whipping through the mangroves with a low, moaning sound. The first drops of rain hit us as we reached the main channel, and within minutes, it had turned into a downpour. The trip back to the marina was tense and difficult. The rain came down in sheets, cutting visibility to almost nothing, and the wind kicked up waves that tossed our small boat around like a toy. Deputy Vance navigated by GPS and memory, steering us through the maze of channels with grim determination. I held on to the side of the boat, soaked to the skin, trying not to think about what we'd seen in the mangroves. By the time we reached the marina, it was mid-afternoon, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. We secured the boat and made a run for the sheriff's substation, both of us drenched and exhausted. Inside, I spread out my notes and the samples we'd collected, trying to make sense of it all. I'll get these samples analyzed, I told Deputy Vance. Send them to the FBI lab in Quantico. We should have results in a few days. And in the meantime, I'm going to interview Garrett Maddox and Curtis Holloway. And I want to go through Raymond's house one more time. There might be something we missed. Deputy Vance nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He'd seen the same thing I had out there in the mangroves, and, like me, he was struggling to explain it. But unlike me, he didn't have to find answers. He could hand this case over to the FBI and walk away. I didn't have that luxury. That evening, I met with Garrett Maddox at his home in Everglades City. Garrett was in his early 50s, a wiry man with sun-weathered skin and the calloused hands of someone who'd spent his life working on boats. He invited me in and offered me coffee, which I gratefully accepted. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain hammering against the windows. "Thanks for agreeing to talk with me," I said, sitting down at his kitchen table. "No problem. I've been thinking about that video ever since I showed it to the deputy. Can't get it out of my head." Garrett poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "Have you figured out what it was?" "Still investigating, but I wanted to hear your account directly. Walk me through what happened that day." Garrett nodded. "It was Saturday evening, around 6:30. I had a group of 4 tourists, a family from Ohio, out for a sunset tour. We'd been cruising through the channels west of Chokoloskee for about an hour, looking at birds mostly. Herons, egrets, the usual stuff. I was filming some of the scenery on my phone for promotional material. I do that sometimes, post clips on my website to attract customers." "And that's when you saw the figure?" "Yeah. I was panning the camera across the mangroves when I noticed something moving. At first, I thought it was another boat, maybe someone fishing. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a boat, it was a person. Or at least, it looked like a person. They were moving through the water, but not swimming or wading. They were upright, walking. And they were moving fast, faster than you could walk through water that deep." "How deep was the water where you saw them?" "Had to be 4, maybe 5 feet. Deep enough that you'd be up to your chest if you tried to walk through it. But this person, or thing, was moving like they were on solid ground. It didn't make sense." Garrett took a sip of his coffee, his hands trembling slightly. "I tried to follow it with the camera, but it disappeared behind some trees, and then it was just gone. Did you get any sense of what the figure looked like? Male, female, clothing?" "Hard to say. The light was fading, and the distance was maybe 150 yards. But it looked like a man, I think, average height, wearing dark clothes. But the face—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "What about the face?" "I couldn't see it clearly. It was in shadow, or turned away from me or something. But I got the impression that it didn't look right, like the proportions were off, or the shape wasn't quite human. I know how crazy that sounds. It's okay. I'm not here to judge. I'm just trying to understand what you saw." Garrett looked at me intently. "Agent Everett, I've lived here my whole life. I know these waters, I know these mangroves. I've seen plenty of weird things out there. Alligators, manatees, weird fish, strange weather patterns. But I've never seen anything like that, and I've never been scared of the Everglades before. But now?" He paused. "Now, I don't want to go back out there, and that terrifies me more than anything." I left Garrett's house feeling more unsettled than before. His account matched what I'd seen in the video and what Deputy Vance and I had witnessed that morning. Whatever was out there in the mangroves, it had been seen by multiple people now, and each time it had behaved in ways that defied rational explanation. The following day, I interviewed Curtis Holloway at his home near the marina. Curtis was Raymond Vance's business partner, a man in his mid-60s with the quiet, weathered demeanor of a lifelong fisherman. He was clearly devastated by Raymond's disappearance, his eyes red-rimmed and his hands constantly fidgeting with a coffee mug. "Raymond was more than a partner," Curtis told me. "He was my best friend. We've been working these waters together for 20 years. I can't believe he's gone." "When was the last time you spoke with him?" I asked. "Friday night, the day before he disappeared. He called me around 8 p.m., said he wanted to talk. I could tell something was bothering him. He sounded nervous, maybe, or scared. I asked him what was wrong, but he said he'd rather talk in person. We agreed to meet Saturday morning at the marina." "But you didn't see him Saturday morning?" "No. When I got there, his truck was in the lot, but Raymond wasn't around. I figured he'd already gone out on the water, so I waited. When he didn't show up by noon, I started calling. His phone went straight to voicemail every time." Curtis set down his coffee mug and rubbed his eyes. I knew something was wrong. Raymond's not the kind of guy to just disappear. He's reliable, methodical. If he said he'd be somewhere, he'd be there. Did Raymond ever mention seeing anything unusual in the mangroves? Anything that might have made him uneasy? Curtis hesitated. Yeah, actually. About a week before he disappeared, he mentioned that some of his traps were being raided. At first, he thought it was just a big alligator or maybe another fisherman stealing his catch. But then he said something strange. He said he'd seen something in the water one morning. Something that didn't belong there. Did he describe it? Not really. He just said it looked like a person, but it was in a part of the mangroves where no one should have been. Said it gave him a bad feeling. I told him he was probably just seeing a poacher or a homeless person camping out in the park. But Raymond didn't think so. He said it moved wrong, whatever that means. I made notes as Curtis spoke, underlining the phrase, moved wrong. That was the second time I'd heard that description. First in Raymond's journal, and now from Curtis. Whatever Raymond had seen, it had struck him as fundamentally unnatural. Curtis, do you think Raymond might have gotten involved in something illegal? Drug smuggling, human trafficking, anything like that? Curtis shook his head emphatically. No way. Raymond was straight as an arrow. He paid his taxes, followed all the regulations, never cut corners. He wouldn't have anything to do with that kind of thing. After the interview, I drove to Raymond's house, a small one-story structure on a quiet street near the marina. Deputy Vance had given me the key, and the crime scene tape had already been removed. The place had an abandoned feel to it, as if Raymond had been gone for months rather than days. I went through the house methodically, looking for anything that might give me a clue about what had happened. Raymond's personal effects were sparse. Some clothes, a few books on commercial fishing and Everglades ecology, a collection of old maps and nautical charts. His bedroom was neat and orderly, the bed made, everything in its place. In the kitchen, I found Raymond's calendar hanging on the wall. Most of the dates were marked with simple notes about trap checks and weather forecasts. But on the Saturday he disappeared, there was a single word written in red ink. Confirm. Confirm what? I looked through the rest of the house, searching for context, but found nothing. The only other item of interest was on Raymond's desk, a printed email from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, dated 2 days before his disappearance. The email was in response to a report Raymond had filed about unusual predation patterns affecting his crab traps in the 10,000 Islands area. The response was boilerplate, thanking him for his report and assuring him that an investigator would look into it. I photographed the email and the calendar entry, then locked up the house and headed back to the motel. It was nearly evening, and the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a sky streaked with orange and purple. The air smelled clean, washed by the rain, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. That night, I reviewed all my notes and recordings, trying to piece together a coherent narrative. Raymond Vance had been a commercial fisherman who'd noticed his traps being raided. He'd seen something in the mangroves, something that moved wrong, something that scared him. He'd filed a report with Fish and Wildlife, but had kept working his traps. Then, on the day he disappeared, he'd written "confirm" on his calendar, gone out to check his traps one more time, and never came back. And now, multiple people, including me, had seen a figure in those same mangroves, a figure that appeared to walk on water, that moved in ways that shouldn't be possible, that disappeared without a trace. I wanted to believe there was a rational explanation. A person in diving gear, standing on a submerged platform, using the mangroves as cover for something illegal. But the more I learned, the less that explanation made sense. Why would a smuggler or poacher go to such elaborate lengths to create the illusion of walking on water? And what about the damaged traps, the diseased trees, the strange smell? Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Deputy Vance. "Agent Everett, sorry to call so late, but something just came in. Another sighting. Caller says they saw a figure matching the description from the video, walking on the water near Lopez River, about 5 miles north of where we were searching. Said it was just after dark, and they got close enough to see it clearly. They're pretty shaken up." I sat up, adrenaline surging through my system. "I'll be right there. Can you meet me at the location?" "Already on my way. I'll text you the coordinates." I grabbed my gear and headed out into the night. Whatever was happening in the Everglades, it wasn't over. And I had a feeling it was only just beginning. The coordinates led me to a remote boat launch on the Lopez River, about 20 minutes north of Chokoloskee. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I arrived, and the place was deserted except for a single pickup truck with a John boat still attached to the trailer. Deputy Vance was already there, talking to a man in his early 30s who looked pale and shaken. "Agent Everett, this is Travis Callahan," the deputy said as I approached. "Travis, this is FBI Special Agent Logan Everett." Travis shook my hand with a grip that was sweaty and trembling. "Thanks for coming out. I know how crazy this sounds, but I swear to God I saw what I saw." "Tell me what happened," I said, pulling out my notepad. Travis took a deep breath. "I was night fishing. I do it a lot. Catfish bite better after dark. I launched my boat around 9 p.m. and headed up the Lopez River into the backcountry. I've got a few spots I like to fish, shallow areas where the mangroves open up. Around 11, I was working one of those spots when I saw something moving on the far side of the channel. What did it look like? At first, I thought it was another fisherman, but then I realized they weren't in a boat. They were just standing there, in the middle of the water. I figured maybe it was really shallow over there, so I moved my boat closer to get a better look." Travis paused, his voice wavering. "That's when I realized it wasn't shallow. The water over there is at least 6-7 feet deep, but this person, or thing, was standing on top of it, just standing there like they were on concrete." "How close did you get?" "Maybe 30 yards, close enough to see details. It was a man, I think, wearing dark clothes, but his face..." Travis shook his head. "His face was wrong, too pale, too smooth, like a mannequin or something, and his eyes, I couldn't see them clearly, but I got the impression they were looking right at me. Not just looking, staring." "What did you do?" "I turned on my spotlight, pointed it right at him. The light hit him full on, and for a second I got a good look. He was just standing there, arms at his sides, not moving. And then, Jesus Christ, then he started walking toward me, on top of the water. Each step was perfect, like he was on solid ground. No splashing, no sinking, just walking." "Did he say anything?" "No, no sound at all. That's what made it so creepy. No sound of footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Just this silent figure walking across the water toward my boat." Travis's voice cracked. "I panicked, started my engine, and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop until I reached this boat launch." I looked out at the dark expanse of the river. "And you're certain about the depth? You're sure it wasn't a sandbar or something submerged just below the surface?" "I fish that spot all the time. I know exactly how deep it is, and besides, even if there was something submerged, you'd still see ripples, disturbance in the water. This was different. It was like he was on an invisible floor." After I finished interviewing Travis, I sent him home and conferred with Deputy Vance. We agreed to come back in the morning to search the area, but neither of us had much hope of finding anything. If this figure could appear and disappear without leaving a trace, what chance did we have of tracking it? I spent the rest of the night at the motel, unable to sleep, my mind racing through possibilities. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed more resources. This was beyond the capability of one agent, and a small-town deputy to handle. I called Janet. "We need to escalate this," I told her without preamble. "I've got multiple witnesses reporting the same phenomenon. I've got a missing person who was clearly scared of something before he disappeared, and I've got physical evidence that doesn't make sense. I need a team down here, and I need access to specialized equipment. Sonar, underwater cameras, maybe even aerial surveillance." Janet was quiet for a moment. "You really think this is worth escalating? The video could still be explained away, and witness testimony is unreliable." "Janet, I saw it myself. Yesterday morning, Deputy Vance and I were in the mangroves, and we saw a figure standing in deep water. It didn't make sense then, and it makes even less sense now. But 3 separate people have reported the same thing, in slightly different locations, over the course of a week. That's a pattern." "Okay," she said finally. "I'll authorize a team. But Logan, I'm sending a couple of other agents down there, and I want you to coordinate with them. This is still your case, but I don't want you going into those mangroves alone anymore. Whatever's out there, if it is connected to Raymond Vance's disappearance, I don't want you ending up the same way." "Understood. And Janet, see if you can get me the lab results on those samples we collected. I want to know what's causing those trees to die. I'll push them through. Should have something by end of day." 2 days later, FBI agents Harper Monroe and Jade Rivera arrived from the Miami field office. Harper was a senior agent with experience in organized crime and human trafficking, while Jade was a forensic specialist with a background in environmental analysis. I briefed them on everything we'd learned so far, showing them the video footage, the witness statements, and the photos of the damaged traps. Harper listened carefully, his expression neutral. "So, we've got a missing fisherman, multiple reports of someone walking on water, and evidence of something tampering with crab traps. What's your theory?" "I don't have one yet," I admitted. "The rational explanations don't fit the evidence. If this were smugglers or poachers, why go to such elaborate lengths? And why target a lone fisherman? There's no logical reason." "What about the possibility of mass hallucination?" Jade suggested. "Could be something in the water, some kind of toxin or pathogen affecting people's perceptions." I considered that, but we've got video evidence and the figure appears on camera the same way it appears to witnesses. And I've been down here for days, spent hours in those mangroves, and I haven't experienced any hallucinogenic effects. "Then we need to go back out there," Harper said. "All of us, together. Let's do a systematic search of the area, set up cameras, see if we can catch this thing in the act." The following morning, we launched 2 boats from the Chokolosky Marina. Deputy Vance piloted one with Harper and me, while a local guide took Jade and a load of equipment in the second boat. We headed back to the same section of mangroves where Raymond's GPS had recorded his last position, the place where Deputy Vance and I had seen the figure days earlier. The weather was clear and warm, the sky a brilliant blue with just a few scattered clouds. It would have been beautiful if not for the oppressive sense of dread I felt as we entered the mangrove channels. Even in daylight, the place felt wrong, too quiet, too still, as if the swamp itself was holding its breath. We spent the morning setting up motion-activated cameras at strategic points throughout the area, positioning them to cover the main channels and the gaps in the mangroves. Jade collected additional water and soil samples, while Harper and I searched for any physical evidence that might explain the sightings. But just like before, we found nothing. No footprints, no boat marks, no sign that anyone had been through this area recently. Around noon, we took a break and drifted in a small basin, discussing our next moves. That's when Jade made an interesting observation. "I've been looking at these water samples," she said, holding up a vial of the murky brown liquid. "The pH is off, way off. This water is significantly more acidic than it should be. And there's a high concentration of organic compounds I can't identify without lab analysis. But whatever they are, they're definitely not natural. Could that explain the dead trees? I asked. Possibly. If something's contaminating the water, it could be killing the vegetation. But I don't know what would cause this level of acidity in a natural waterway. There's no industrial activity nearby, no sewage outlets, nothing that should be producing this kind of chemical signature. So we're dealing with an environmental contamination issue on top of everything else, Harper said. Great. As we were talking, one of the cameras we'd set up sent an alert to Jade's tablet. She glanced at it, then her eyes widened. We've got movement, camera 3 about 200 yards west of here. We immediately started both engines and headed toward the camera's location, moving as quickly as we could through the narrow channels. My pulse was racing, adrenaline flooding my system. If we could just catch this thing, get a clear look at it, maybe we could finally get some answers. We reached the camera within 5 minutes. It was mounted on a mangrove tree overlooking a narrow channel, and according to the motion sensor, something had passed by less than a minute ago. Jade pulled up the footage on her tablet, and we all crowded around to watch. The video showed the channel from an elevated angle, the water dark and still, the mangroves pressing in from both sides. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, at the edge of the frame, something moved into view. It was the figure, human-shaped, wearing dark clothing, moving through the shallows along the edge of the mangroves. But unlike in Garrett's video, this footage was much clearer, shot in full daylight at close range. I could see details I hadn't been able to see before. The figure was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a thin, almost gaunt build. Its movements were smooth and fluid, but there was something mechanical about them, like a puppet being moved by invisible strings. It walked along the water's edge, its feet, if they were feet, barely disturbing the surface, and then it stopped and turned directly toward the camera. For a few seconds we got a clear view of its face, or at least what should have been a face. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were wrong, distorted, as if someone had described a human face without ever having seen one. The skin was too pale, almost gray, and the eyes were completely black, with no visible whites or pupils. It stared at the camera for maybe 5 seconds. Then it turned away and continued moving along the channel, eventually disappearing from frame. We watched the footage 3 more times in complete silence. Finally, Harper spoke, his voice tight with tension. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I said. "But we need to find it, now." We followed the path the figure had taken, using the GPS coordinates from the camera to guide us. The channel wound through the densest part of the mangrove forest, a place where the trees grew so close together that navigation was nearly impossible. But we pressed on, determined to catch up to whatever we'd seen on that video. After about 15 minutes, we reached a section where the channel widened into a small pool, maybe 30 feet across, completely surrounded by mangroves. The water here was darker than anywhere else we'd been, almost black, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. Dead fish floated on the surface, their bodies bloated and pale. "Something's killed everything in this pool," Jade said, staring at the dead fish. "Look at the gills. They're burned. Chemical burn, maybe, or extreme acidification." Deputy Vance killed the engine, and we drifted into the center of the pool. The silence was absolute. No insects, no birds, no sound of water lapping against the boat. Just dead quiet. And then I saw it. On the far side of the pool, partially hidden behind a cluster of mangrove roots, was what looked like an opening. A gap in the trees, leading deeper into the forest. It was almost invisible, camouflaged by the dense vegetation, but from our angle, I could just make out the dark space beyond. "There," I said, pointing. "Do you see that?" Harper followed my gaze. Is that a cave or a tunnel? Can't be. We're barely above sea level. There shouldn't be any caves or tunnels in this area. Then what is it? I didn't have an answer, but every instinct I had was screaming at me not to go in there. That opening looked wrong somehow, too dark, too still, like a mouth waiting to swallow us whole. Jade was already maneuvering the boat closer, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding any sense of self-preservation. We need to investigate. This could be where our figure went. Jade, I don't think that's a good idea, I started to say, but she'd already reached the edge of the pool and was tying off the boat to a mangrove root. I'm just going to take a quick look, she said, pulling a flashlight from her pack. 2 minutes in and out. Harper and I exchanged a glance. Then we both drew our weapons and followed her. Deputy Vance stayed with the boats, his hand on his sidearm, his face pale. The opening was about 4 feet wide and maybe 6 feet tall, just big enough for an adult to walk through upright. Beyond it was a narrow passage that seemed to lead into the heart of the mangrove forest. The ground was soft mud, studded with roots and debris, and the smell was even worse here, that mixture of rot and chemicals that made my eyes water. Jade led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Harper and I followed close behind, our weapons at the ready. The passage twisted and turned, the mangrove roots closing in around us like the walls of a living tunnel. After about 30 feet, it opened up into a larger space. We swept our flashlights around, trying to get a sense of what we were seeing. It was some kind of hollow or chamber, about 15 feet across with a ceiling of tangled roots and branches maybe 8 feet overhead. The floor was covered in several inches of black, foul-smelling water, and scattered around the space were objects, dozens of them. Crab traps, damaged, twisted, torn open, just like the ones we'd found in the channels. But these had been dragged here, piled up like trophies or offerings. "What is this place?" Jade whispered. "I don't know, but we need to document everything and get out of here." I started taking photos with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. Harper did the same, while Jade collected water samples from the standing pools. As I was photographing a particularly badly damaged trap, I noticed something underneath it. A piece of fabric, dark and waterlogged. I carefully lifted the trap and pulled the fabric free. It was a jacket, a fishing jacket with the name Vance embroidered on the front pocket. "I found Raymond's jacket," I called out to the others. My voice sounded too loud in the enclosed space, echoing off the roots. Harper came over, shining his light on the jacket. "Any blood? Signs of struggle?" I examined it carefully. "No, it's intact, just soaked and muddy, like it was taken off rather than torn off." "So Raymond was here," Harper said. "Or at least his jacket was." Before I could respond, I heard a sound from the passage behind us. A wet, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled through mud. We all froze, our lights swinging toward the entrance we'd come through. The sound came again, closer this time. And then we saw a shadow move across the opening, blocking what little light filtered in from outside. "Who's there?" Harper called out, his weapon raised. "FBI, show yourself!" No response. The shadow remained at the entrance, utterly still. I moved toward the opening, my Glock aimed at center mass. "This is your last warning. Identify yourself or we will—" The shadow moved. Fast. Faster than anything human should be able to move. It was there, and then it was gone, and in the split second I saw it, I got the same impression I'd had from the video. Wrong proportions, wrong movements, something fundamentally not human. "Go!" Harper shouted. "Back to the boats, now!" We ran, or tried to. The mud sucked at our boots, the roots caught at our legs, and the passage seemed twice as long as it had on the way in. Behind us, I could hear that dragging sound again, following us, getting closer. We burst out of the opening and into the pool, gasping for air. Deputy Vance had already started the engines, and we scrambled into the boats without bothering to untie them properly. The ropes snapped as we accelerated away from the mangroves, leaving deep wake behind us. We didn't stop until we were back in open water, well clear of the mangrove channels. Only then did we kill the engines and catch our breath. "Did anyone see what that was?" Jade asked, her voice shaking. "I saw a shadow," Harper said. "That's all. Moving faster than any person should be able to move." "It was following us," I said. "I'm sure of it. Whatever's out there in those mangroves, it didn't want us in that hollow. That was its territory." We made it back to the marina by late afternoon, all of us shaken and exhausted. The lab results from Quantico were waiting for me when I checked my email. The water samples showed extreme levels of acidity and the presence of several unknown organic compounds. The swab from the tree roots showed trace amounts of what the lab tentatively identified as some kind of biological secretion, possibly from a marine organism, but the exact source couldn't be determined without further analysis. None of it made sense. Marine organism secretions in freshwater mangroves, unknown organic compounds with no identifiable source. And how did any of this connect to a figure that could walk on water and a missing fisherman whose jacket we'd found in a hidden hollow? That evening, we regrouped at the sheriff's substation to review everything we'd learned. Jade had downloaded all the footage from the cameras, and we spent an hour going through it frame by frame. Most of it showed nothing, just empty channels and still water. But camera 3, the one that had captured the clearest image of the figure, showed something else. In the hours after we'd left the area, the camera had continued recording. Around 4 p.m., it captured the figure again, walking along the same channel in the opposite direction. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were 3 more figures, moving in single file through the shallows. All of them had that same wrong, mechanical gait. All of them had that same pale, distorted appearance. "There's more than one," Harper said quietly. "Jesus Christ, there's more than one." "We need to call in more resources," I said. "Whatever's happening here, it's beyond the 3 of us. We need a full investigation team, forensic specialists, maybe even military support if it comes to that." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. What exactly would I tell my superiors? That we'd found figures walking on water in the Everglades? That we'd discovered a hollow filled with damaged crab traps and a missing fisherman's jacket? They'd think I'd lost my mind. They'd pull me off the case and send someone else, someone who'd look for rational explanations and probably never find them. No, I had to see this through myself. I had to understand what was happening here, even if it meant going back into those mangroves, even if it meant facing whatever these things were. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that figure from the camera footage, those black eyes staring directly at the lens. And I kept thinking about Raymond Vance, about what might have happened to him in those final hours. Had he discovered what we'd found? Had he gone into that hollow, seen those things up close? And if so, where was he now? Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Deputy Vance. "Agent Everett, I'm sorry to call so late, but I just got another report. A woman in Everglades City says she saw someone walking along the edge of the water behind her house. She called it in about an hour ago. Said the person was just standing there in the shallows, not moving, staring at her through her window. Did she get a description? Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes, pale face, and she said the eyes were wrong, all black like a shark's eyes." I closed my eyes. Where is she now? At her daughter's house in Naples. Wouldn't stay in her own home. She's pretty spooked. I'll interview her tomorrow. For now, tell her to stay with her daughter and lock all the doors and windows. And Deputy, I want you to increase patrols in the area. If anyone else reports seeing these figures, I want to know about it immediately." "Understood. And, Agent Everett, whatever's going on here, I've lived in Collier County my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what these things are, but I don't think they're human. I don't think they're human at all." After we hung up, I sat in the dark motel room, listening to the sounds of the night. The insects, the distant rumble of thunder, the whisper of wind through the palm trees. And beneath it all, that low, rhythmic sound I'd heard on my first night here. The sound I'd told myself was just the wind or the tide. But now I knew better. It was breathing, slow, steady, coming from somewhere in the darkness of the Everglades. And whatever was making that sound, it was getting closer. Dawn came too quickly. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of sleep, my dreams filled with dark water and pale figures standing at the edge of perception. When my phone alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., I felt like I'd been awake the entire night. I met Harper, Jade, and Deputy Vance at a diner in Everglades City. None of us said much. We all knew what we had to do, even though none of us wanted to admit it. We had to go back into those mangroves. We had to find out what happened to Raymond Vance, and we had to understand what these figures were. It was our job, but more than that, it felt necessary. Like if we didn't see this through, whatever was happening would only get worse. Over weak coffee and eggs, we developed a plan. We'd go back to the hollow where we'd found Raymond's jacket. We'd set up a perimeter with cameras and motion sensors, and we'd wait. If the figures returned, we'd document everything. And if possible, we'd attempt contact. Not an arrest, we all knew that wouldn't work, but communication. Maybe these things, whatever they were, could be reasoned with. It was a thin plan, but it was all we had. We launched from the marina just after 7 a.m. The weather was changing again, clouds building on the horizon, the air thick with humidity. We took both boats, fully loaded with equipment and enough supplies for a full day in the field. As we headed west into the mangrove channels, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow in the trees, every ripple on the water, it all felt intentional, purposeful. It took us nearly an hour to reach the hollow. The passage looked even darker in daylight somehow, as if the mangroves themselves were actively blocking the sun. We tied off the boats and began setting up our equipment, working quickly and efficiently. Cameras at the entrance and inside the hollow. Motion sensors at regular intervals along the passage. Recording devices that would capture any sound. While Jade and Harper worked on the technical setup, I explored the hollow more carefully than I'd been able to the day before. The crab traps were still there, piled in that strange, deliberate way. I counted 23 in total, far more than Raymond could have lost. These had been collected over time, gathered from different locations throughout the 10,000 islands. But why? What purpose did it serve to drag these traps into a hidden hollow in the middle of the mangroves? I was examining one of the traps when I noticed something carved into the muddy floor near the back wall of the hollow. It looked like symbols or letters scratched into the packed earth with something sharp. I called Jade over. "Can you photograph these? I want to make sure we have a clear record." She knelt down and started taking detailed photos. "What do you think they mean?" I studied the markings more closely. They weren't letters exactly, not any alphabet I recognized, but there was a pattern to them, a deliberate structure. I think someone was trying to communicate. Maybe Raymond left these before. I didn't finish the sentence. Before what? Before he disappeared? Before something took him? Jade looked up at me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She was a scientist, trained to look for rational explanations, but even she was starting to accept that this situation defied conventional logic. I don't know, I admitted. But I think he was trying to tell us something. We spent the next hour documenting everything in the hollow. When we were finished, we moved back to the boats and waited. The plan was to observe from a safe distance, monitor the cameras remotely, and see if anything returned to the hollow. If the figures showed up, we'd have video evidence from multiple angles, and if they entered the hollow, we'd know what they were doing there. The wait was excruciating. We sat in the boats, drifting just outside the pool, listening to the sounds of the swamp. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a sauna. Insects swarmed around us, attracted by our sweat. My throat was dry, my clothes soaked through, but I barely noticed. All my attention was focused on the tablet in Jade's hands, showing feeds from all 6 cameras. Around noon, Camera 2 registered movement. "We've got something," Jade said quietly. "North approach, about 50 yards out." We watched the feed. A figure was moving through the mangroves, using that same strange gliding gait we'd seen before. It was heading directly toward the hollow. "Get ready," Harper said, his hand on his sidearm. "If this goes bad, we're leaving. No heroes." The figure reached the pool and stopped at the edge, just outside the entrance to the hollow. For a long moment it stood completely still, as if sensing our presence. Then it turned its head, that same wrong, mechanical movement, and looked directly at Camera 2. We were at least 100 yards away, completely out of sight, but I would swear it knew we were there. It knew we were watching. Then it did something I wasn't expecting. It raised one arm and made a gesture, a beckoning motion, inviting us, or maybe warning us. It was impossible to tell. "What's it doing?" Deputy Vance whispered. "I think it wants us to follow," I said. "Or it's showing us something." The figure lowered its arm and entered the hollow. We watched on the internal cameras as it moved through the passage and into the main chamber. Once there, it went to the pile of crab traps and began arranging them, moving them with those pale, elongated hands, repositioning them into a specific pattern. "What the hell is it doing?" Harper muttered. Jade was typing notes furiously on her phone. "It's creating something. Look at the pattern. It's not random. It's deliberate." We watched for another 5 minutes as the figure continued its work. When it was finished, the crab traps had been arranged into a rough circle, with several traps stacked in the center. The whole configuration looked almost like an altar, or a warning. Then the figure stopped and turned to face the camera mounted inside the hollow. For several seconds it stared directly at the lens, and then it opened its mouth. No sound came out. The audio pickups detected nothing, but I could see its throat working, see the muscles moving beneath that pale, wrong skin. It was trying to communicate, but whatever sounds it was making were beyond the range of human hearing, or maybe beyond the capability of our equipment to detect. After a moment, it closed its mouth and walked to the symbols carved in the mud. It knelt down, the movement sending a shiver down my spine because it looked so human and so alien at the same time, and began to add to the markings. Its fingers moved quickly, scratching new lines and shapes into the packed earth. "We need to see what it's writing," I said. "Can you zoom in on that camera?" Jade adjusted the view, bringing the symbols into clearer focus. The new markings looked similar to the ones Raymond had left, but more complex, more elaborate. And as the figure worked, I realized something. The patterns weren't random. They were coordinates. Longitude and latitude, expressed in a notation I'd never seen before, but unmistakably geographic markers. "It's giving us a location," I said. "It's telling us where to go." Harper leaned in to look at the screen. "Where do those coordinates point to?" Jade pulled up a mapping program on her phone and entered the numbers as best she could interpret them. After a moment, the map loaded, showing a location about 3 miles southwest of our current position. It was deep in the 10,000 Islands, in one of the most remote and inaccessible areas of the Everglades. "That's open water," Deputy Vance said, looking at the map over Jade's shoulder. "Nothing there but a few scattered mangrove islands. Nobody goes there. Too shallow for most boats, too isolated for fishing." The figure in the hollow had finished its work. It stood up, looked at the camera one last time, and then walked back through the passage and out into the pool. We watched it disappear into the mangroves, moving in the direction of the coordinates it had just given us. "We have to follow it," I said. "We have to see where it's going." "Logan, that could be a trap," Harper warned. "These things have been watching us, studying us. They could be leading us into an ambush. Or they could be trying to show us something. Something about what happened to Raymond Vance. We came here to find answers, and right now, this is our best lead." We debated for another few minutes, but in the end, we all agreed. We had to follow. We gathered our equipment, left one camera running in the hollow to record anything else that might happen there, and began the journey to the coordinates. The trip took us deeper into the Everglades than I'd ever been. The channels grew narrower, the mangroves more dense, until we were navigating by GPS alone, the trees blocking out so much sunlight that it felt like dusk, even though it was early afternoon. The water grew shallower too, forcing us to switch to push poles in several places to avoid running aground. Finally, we reached the coordinates. It was a small island, maybe 50 yards across, covered in mangroves but with a narrow sandy beach on one side. We approached cautiously, scanning for any signs of the figures or anything else out of place. "There," Jade said, pointing to the beach. "Do you see that?" Half buried in the sand was what looked like a boat, an old John boat, similar to the one Raymond Vance had used, overturned and partially covered by debris. We beached our boats and approached on foot, weapons drawn. The John boat had Raymond's registration number painted on the hull. This was his boat, the one that had supposedly been back at the dock in Chokolosky, the one with the warm engine and mud on the deck. But that was impossible. We'd seen that boat ourselves. Unless, "There's two boats," Harper said, reaching the same conclusion I had. He had two boats, or this is someone else's with the same registration. But I knew that wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut. This was Raymond's boat, but somehow, impossibly, it had been in two places at once. I looked around the small island, trying to understand. And that's when I saw the opening. Not a passage through the mangroves this time, but a hole in the ground. A sinkhole, maybe 6 feet across, descending straight down into darkness. The edges were damp, and there were marks in the sand leading to it. Drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled to the edge and dropped in. "There's a sinkhole here," I called to the others, "and it looks like something went into it recently." We approached the opening carefully. I shone my flashlight into the hole, but the beam only penetrated about 15 feet before the shaft turned and disappeared. The walls were wet, coated with that same glossy substance we'd seen on the mangrove roots, and from somewhere far below, I could hear water dripping, echoing up through the darkness. "This is a cave system," Jade said, kneeling at the edge and examining the rock. "Probably limestone, eroded over thousands of years. It must connect to an underground aquifer." "Can we get down there?" I asked. "Maybe. We'd need climbing gear, lights, probably some kind of breathing apparatus depending on how deep it goes. This isn't something we can do unprepared." But even as she said it, I knew we didn't have time for a proper cave expedition. We had hours of daylight left at most, and once the sun went down, navigating these channels would be nearly impossible. If we were going to find out what was down there, it had to be now. "I'm going down," I said. "Just far enough to see what's there. 5 minutes, then I'm coming back up." Harper started to protest, but I cut him off. "This is why we came here. Raymond Vance was trying to show us something, and these figures led us to this exact spot. Whatever answers we're looking for, they're down there." In the end, we rigged a rope using what climbing gear we had, and I lowered myself into the sinkhole. The descent was treacherous, the walls slick, and the handhold scarce. About 20 feet down, the shaft opened up into a larger cavity, and I found myself in an underground chamber about the size of a small room. My flashlight beam swept across the space, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The chamber was full of things. Personal effects scattered across the floor and piled in the corners. Wallets, keys, pieces of clothing, watches, jewelry. All of it waterlogged and covered in that glossy substance. And among the debris, I saw bones. Human bones, picked clean and arranged in small piles. Raymond Vance wasn't the first to disappear in these waters. He was just the latest. I was about to call up to the others when I heard something. A wet, breathing sound coming from somewhere deeper in the cave system. The same sound I'd been hearing at night, but closer now. Much closer. I turned toward the sound, my flashlight beam shaking, and saw movement in a narrow passage leading out of the chamber. Multiple figures moving through the darkness with that same impossible grace. They were coming toward me, emerging from the depths. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed the rope and shouted for Harper to pull me up. The ascent was frantic, my hands burning on the rope, my feet slipping on the wet stone. Below me, I could hear them moving, could feel the air change as they entered the chamber. I burst out of the sinkhole gasping, and Harper and Deputy Vance dragged me away from the edge. For a moment, we all just stood there, staring at the opening, waiting to see if anything would follow me up. But nothing did. The opening remained dark and still. Whatever those things were, they belonged to the underground. The surface was our territory, not theirs. "What did you see?" Jade asked. I told them. The chamber, the personal effects, the bones, the figures moving through the darkness. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. "We need to seal that opening," Harper said. "Fill it in, collapse it, something. We can't leave it open." "No," I said. "We need to document it. We need to record what's down there, recover those remains, and figure out how many people have gone missing in these waters over the years. This is bigger than Raymond Vance. This is—" I stopped, because at that moment I understood. The figures weren't attacking us. They weren't threatening us. They were showing us. They'd led us to this place deliberately, had revealed their underground lair, had let us see the evidence of their existence. They wanted us to know. They wanted it documented. But why? The answer came to me as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the small island. The figures weren't hiding from us. They were warning us. The damaged crab traps, the mysterious sightings, the disappearances. It was all a message. This is our territory. This is our domain. And if you come here, if you disturb us, you won't leave. Raymond Vance had discovered this truth. He'd found evidence of them, had gotten too close, and they'd taken him. Not out of malice, but as a consequence, like an animal defending its territory. We left the island as the last light faded from the sky, taking with us photographs and GPS coordinates and the terrible knowledge of what lay beneath. I knew we'd come back. We'd have to. There would be investigations, excavations, attempts to understand what these creatures were and how long they'd been living in the Everglades. But I also knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that we'd never truly understand them. They were something other, something that existed in the spaces between land and water, between the known world and the hidden depths. They walked on water not through magic, but through an understanding of their environment that we couldn't comprehend. They moved between realms, between the visible and the invisible, as easily as we moved between rooms. As we navigated back through the darkening channels, I thought about Raymond's final journal entry. Something knows where they are. He'd been right. Something did know. Something had been watching his traps, studying his patterns, learning his territory. And when he'd gotten too close to their secrets, they'd taken him into the depths, down into the limestone caves where light never reached and human rules didn't apply. His body would never be found. I was certain of that. Whatever those creatures were, they didn't leave evidence behind. They'd survived in these waters for how long? Decades? Centuries? Longer? Without being discovered because they understood the first rule of survival. Stay hidden. Stay in the shadows. Be seen only when you want to be seen. By the time we reached the marina, it was fully dark. We tied off the boats in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As I walked back to my truck, I could still hear that breathing sound carried on the night wind from somewhere in the darkness of the Everglades. I filed my report the next day. I documented everything we'd found, included all the video evidence, the photographs, the GPS coordinates. I recommended a full investigation by the FBI's specialized units, possibly even involvement from other agencies that dealt with unexplained phenomena. But I also knew, deep down, that no amount of investigation would give us real answers. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some things exist in the margins of our understanding, just beyond the reach of science and logic. Raymond Vance had learned that truth in his final hours, and now, so had I. I left Collier County 3 days later, driving north on I-75 through the vast emptiness of the Everglades. In my rearview mirror, I could see the storm clouds gathering over the 10,000 islands, dark and heavy with rain. And somewhere beneath those clouds, in the black water and twisted mangroves, the figures continued their silent vigil, walking on water that was never quite solid, moving through shadows that were never quite empty, breathing in rhythm with the tide and the wind and the slow, patient heartbeat of the swamp itself. I never found out what happened to Raymond Vance's body. The case was officially listed as missing person, presumed deceased. His boat, the one we found on the island, was recovered and returned to his estate. The sinkhole was mapped and photographed, but a planned excavation was postponed indefinitely due to safety concerns and budget limitations. The damaged crab traps were collected and stored in evidence. The video footage was analyzed by experts who could offer no explanation for what they showed. The case file grew thick with reports and theories and unanswered questions. But I know the truth. I saw it with my own eyes, felt it in my bones. The Everglades are deeper than any map can show. And in those depths, things live that we were never meant to find. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that breathing sound. Even though I'm hundreds of miles away, even though I'm safe in my apartment in Tampa, I hear it. A low, rhythmic sound, like the tide coming in, like something vast and patient, waiting in the darkness. And I know, with absolute certainty, that they're still out there, still walking on water, still watching from the shadows, still protecting their territory in the only way they know how. The case of Raymond Vance remains open, but some cases I've learned are meant to stay that way. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed, and some mysteries are better left in the dark water and the twisted roots where they belong, where they've always belonged. My name is Carter Bishop, and I've been working as a special agent with the FBI's Jacksonville field office for the past 9 years. Most of that time has been spent on narcotics investigations, gang task forces, and the occasional organized crime case that crosses state lines. It's not glamorous work, nothing like what you see on television, but it's important, and every once in a while you get a case that stays with you long after the file is closed. This is one of those cases. It started on a Thursday evening in March of 2023. I was at home, just sitting down to a late dinner, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a restricted number, which usually meant someone from the office or one of my confidential informants. I answered on the third ring. Bishop. There was a pause, then a voice I recognized immediately. Agent Bishop, this is Miranda Vance from Tactical Operations. We've got a situation. One of your CIs has gone off the grid. I set down my fork. Miranda worked the night shift in our operations center, monitoring electronic surveillance and tracking field agents. If she was calling me directly, it meant something was seriously wrong. Which CI? Marcus Holloway. His phone signal dropped about 2 hours ago. Last known location on Highway 27 near Lake Wales. We've been trying to reach him ever since. No response to calls, texts, or emergency pings. My stomach tightened. Marcus Holloway had been one of my most reliable informants for the past 18 months. He was embedded in a mid-level drug trafficking organization operating between Central Florida and the Panhandle, feeding us intelligence that had led to 3 major arrests and the seizure of over $2 million in narcotics. He was also paranoid as hell, which had kept him alive this long. Marcus didn't just go dark without a reason. What was he doing on Highway 27? I asked. That's way outside his normal territory. We don't know. His last text to you was at 6:15 p.m. saying he had something urgent and needed to meet. Then nothing. His phone's GPS shows he was heading south on 27, then the signal just stopped. We've got the exact coordinates where it went dead. I was already moving, grabbing my keys and jacket. Send me the location. I'm heading out there now. Agent Bishop, should I notify your supervisor? Protocol says, I'll handle it. Just send me those coordinates. The drive from Jacksonville to Lake Wales normally takes about 3 hours, but I made it in 2.5, pushing my bureau-issued sedan well past the speed limit on I-10 and then down through the rural highways of Central Florida. As I drove, I tried calling Marcus a dozen times. Every call went straight to voicemail. I texted him, using the emergency code we'd established that would tell him to get to safety immediately. No response. The landscape changed as I drove south. The sprawling developments and commercial strips of Jacksonville gave way to smaller towns, then to long stretches of nothing but pine forests and cattle ranches. Highway 27 cut through the heart of rural Florida, a 2-lane road that locals called the Forgotten Highway because it seemed stuck in time, bypassed by the interstates and ignored by tourists. This was old Florida, run-down gas stations, roadside fruit stands, and motels that looked like they'd been abandoned since the 1970s. It was nearly midnight when I reached the coordinates Miranda had sent me. The location was about 5 miles south of Lake Wales, in a particularly desolate stretch of highway where the only lights came from my headlights and the occasional passing semi-truck. I pulled off onto the shoulder and killed the engine. According to the GPS data, this was where Marcus's phone signal had stopped. I got out of the car and looked around. To my left was dense forest, the pine trees forming a dark wall that seemed to absorb light. To my right, across the highway, I could make out the silhouette of a building set back from the road maybe 100 yards. Even in the darkness, I could tell it was a motel. The classic L-shaped design, 2 stories with what looked like a faded sign out front. I grabbed my flashlight and crossed the highway. As I got closer, I could make out more details. The place was called the Palms Motor Lodge, though I didn't see any palm trees anywhere near it. The sign out front was dark, the neon tubes either broken or deliberately turned off. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds growing through, and most of the windows were either boarded up or covered with yellowed curtains. The place looked abandoned. But as I swept my flashlight across the property, I noticed something that made me pause. There were tire tracks in the dirt near the entrance, fresh ones, made within the last few hours. And near what looked like the motel office, I could see a faint light coming from inside. Someone was here, or had been recently. I approached the office carefully, my hand resting on the Glock at my hip. The door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my foot and stepped inside, flashlight raised. "FBI, anyone here?" The office was small and musty, smelling of mildew and old cigarette smoke. There was a reception desk with an ancient computer monitor and a rack of keys hanging on the wall behind it. The light I'd seen was coming from a small lamp on the desk, turned down low. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but I could see recent disturbances. Handprints on the desk, footprints in the dust on the floor. Someone had been here very recently, and judging by the size of the footprints, it was more than one person. On the desk, I found a guest registry book, the old-fashioned kind with handwritten entries. I flipped it open to the most recent page. The last entry was dated today, March 23rd, 2023, at 6:47 p.m. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. M. Holloway, room 214. My pulse quickened. Marcus had checked into this motel about 5 hours ago. But why? He'd never mentioned this place before, and it was way off the beaten path from his usual haunts. And where was he now? I pulled out my phone and called Miranda. "I'm at a motel on Highway 27, place called the Palms Motor Lodge. Marcus checked in here a few hours ago, room 214. I'm going to check it out. Be careful, Agent Bishop, and keep your phone on. I'll monitor your location." Copy that. I left the office and climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor. The walkway was concrete, with metal railings that were rusted and loose in places. Most of the doors had numbers hanging crooked or missing entirely. I moved along the walkway, counting rooms, until I reached what should have been 214. The door was there, the number clearly visible. But something was wrong. The door was slightly open, just like the office had been, and I could see scratch marks around the lock as if someone had forced their way in, or forced their way out. I drew my weapon and pushed the door open slowly. "Marcus, it's Bishop. You in there?" No response. The room beyond was dark. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam inside. The room was small and sparse, exactly what you'd expect from a cheap roadside motel. A queen bed with a faded floral bedspread, a nightstand with a broken lamp, a dresser with a TV from the 990s sitting on top. The carpet was stained and threadbare, and the wallpaper was peeling near the ceiling. But what caught my attention immediately was the condition of the room. It had been torn apart. The mattress was half off the bed, the sheets pulled away and twisted. The dresser drawers were open, contents spilled onto the floor. The bathroom door was hanging at an angle, one hinge torn from the frame. And there were marks on the walls, long, deep scratches, as if someone had clawed at the plaster. But no blood, no signs of violence beyond the destruction. And no Marcus. I holstered my weapon and began a careful search of the room, documenting everything with my phone's camera. On the nightstand, I found Marcus's phone, an iPhone in a distinctive red case. The screen was cracked, and when I tried to turn it on, nothing happened. Dead battery, or maybe damaged in whatever struggle had happened here. I bagged the phone as evidence and continued searching. In the bathroom, I found Marcus's wallet sitting on the edge of the sink, his ID and cash still inside. His car keys were on the floor near the bed. Everything he would have needed to leave was still here, which meant either he'd left in a hurry without his belongings, or something had prevented him from taking them. As I was photographing the scratches on the wall, I heard something. A faint sound coming from somewhere nearby. It sounded like voices, muffled and distant, as if coming through the walls. I moved to the door and stepped back out onto the walkway. The sound was louder out here. It was coming from further down the walkway, from one of the other rooms. I moved toward it slowly, trying to pinpoint the exact source. As I got closer to room 218, the sound became clearer. It was definitely voices. 2 people, maybe more, speaking in low tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm sounded like conversation. I approached room 218 and knocked on the door. "FBI, open the door!" The voices stopped immediately. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then I heard movement inside. Footsteps, rapid and light, moving away from the door. I tried the handle. Locked. I said, "FBI, open this door now or I'm coming in." No response. The footsteps had stopped, and now there was nothing but silence. I considered kicking in the door, but something made me hesitate. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched. Not from inside the room, but from somewhere else, somewhere nearby. I turned and looked down the walkway. The other rooms were dark, their doors closed, their windows either boarded up or covered. But I could swear I saw movement in one of the windows, room 226, at the far end of the building. Just a flicker, like someone stepping back from the glass. I called out again. "This is the FBI. I need everyone to exit their rooms with their hands visible." Nothing. The entire motel remained silent and still, but I knew I wasn't alone here. I could feel it, the same instinct that had kept me alive in more dangerous situations than I could count. There were people in this place, hiding in those dark rooms, watching me. But why? I pulled out my phone and called for backup. The nearest sheriff's deputy was at least 20 minutes away, but I wanted officers on scene before I searched any more rooms. As I waited, I walked back to room 214 and conducted a more thorough search, looking for anything that might tell me what Marcus had been doing here. In the trash can, I found a crumpled receipt from a gas station about 10 miles north on Highway 27. It was dated today, 6:22 p.m., about 25 minutes before Marcus checked into the motel. He'd bought gas and a bottle of water, nothing unusual, but written on the back of the receipt, in Marcus's handwriting, was a note. Blue sedan, Florida, plates, following since Ocala. My stomach dropped. Marcus had thought he was being followed. That's why he'd come here. He was trying to shake a tail, or maybe confront whoever was following him. But why choose this particular motel? And who had been following him? I took photos of the receipt and continued searching. Under the bed, I found something else. A small digital camera, the cheap kind you could buy at any drugstore. The lens was cracked, but when I turned it on, it still functioned. The memory card showed 15 photos, all taken within the last few hours. I scrolled through them quickly. The first few photos showed the interior of a car. Marcus's car, judging by the steering wheel I recognized. He'd been documenting his drive south on Highway 27, taking photos every few miles. Then there were several photos of the highway itself, zoomed in on a vehicle behind him. A blue sedan, just like he'd written on the receipt. The license plate was visible in one of the photos. Florida tags, starting with QRT. The next photos showed the exterior of the Palms Motor Lodge taken from the parking lot. Marcus had been documenting the place before he checked in, and the final 3 photos showed something that made my blood run cold. They were taken from inside room 214, looking out through the window. The angle suggested Marcus had been standing at the window, watching the parking lot. In the first photo, I could see the blue sedan parked near the office. In the second photo, 2 figures were walking from the sedan toward the motel. They were too far away, and the light was too poor to make out details, but they were clearly adults, both wearing dark clothing. The third photo was the most disturbing. It showed the same two figures, but now they were much closer, standing just outside the window, looking up at room 214, looking directly at the camera. Their faces were obscured by shadow and poor image quality, but there was something wrong about their proportions. The heads seemed slightly too large, the bodies slightly too thin. It could have been a trick of the angle or the lighting, but it made me deeply uneasy. I saved the photos to my phone and put the camera in an evidence bag. Outside, I could hear the approaching sirens of the sheriff's deputies. Help was arriving. But I had a feeling that whatever had happened here, we were already too late. 2 deputies from the Polk County Sheriff's Office arrived within minutes of each other. I briefed them quickly on the situation. Missing federal informant, room torn apart, evidence of other occupants in the motel, possible hostile individuals on the property. We agreed to conduct a systematic search of every room, starting with the ones that showed signs of recent activity. Room 218, where I'd heard the voices, was first. One of the deputies kicked in the door, and we swept in with weapons drawn. The room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no personal effects, nothing. The walls were bare plaster, the floor bare concrete. It looked like the room had never been finished, or had been stripped down to the studs at some point and never rebuilt. But I'd heard voices in here. I was certain of it. The deputy and I exchanged looks. "Could the sound have been coming from another room?" he asked. "Sound carries weird in these old buildings." "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. The voices had been clear, distinct, coming from this specific room. Yet there was no evidence anyone had been here in months, maybe years. We continued down the walkway, checking each room. Most were in similar condition, either abandoned and empty, or locked with no response to our knocking. We found no other people, no signs of recent habitation. It was as if the entire motel was a ghost town, except for room 214 where Marcus had checked in. When we reached room 226, the one where I thought I'd seen movement in the window, the door was already open. Inside, we found an old television on a dresser, still plugged in but turned off. The bed was made, the room tidy. It looked like it was being maintained, as if waiting for a guest, but there was no one here, no luggage, no personal items, nothing. "This place is giving me the creeps," one of the deputies muttered. "Who the hell is running this motel?" That was a good question. We headed back downstairs to the office. The desk was still as I'd left it. The guest registry opened to the page showing Marcus's check-in. But now I noticed something I'd missed before. The handwriting for the entries above Marcus's, going back several months, was all the same. The same handwriting, the same pen, as if one person had written all of them. But the names and dates were different. Supposedly different guests checking in on different days. It didn't make sense, unless someone was fabricating guest records. But why? I was examining the registry more closely when I noticed something else on the desk. A small security monitor, partially hidden behind the old computer. It was turned off, but when I pressed the power button, it flickered to life. The screen showed 4 camera feeds, cycling every few seconds. Camera 1 showed the parking lot. Camera 2 showed the walkway on the second floor. Camera 3 showed the office interior. I could see myself standing at the desk. And Camera 4 showed what looked like a hallway or corridor with several doors visible. But I didn't recognize the location. It didn't match any part of the motel I'd seen so far. "Where's this hallway?" I asked the deputies. They looked at the monitor. "Don't know. We didn't see anything like that when we searched the building." I cycled through the camera feeds again, paying closer attention to Camera 4. The hallway was dimly lit, with old-fashioned sconce lights on the walls. The carpet was dark red, and the walls were covered in outdated wallpaper. At the far end of the hallway, I could just make out a door with a number on it. The image was grainy, but it looked like 214. "That's Marcus's room," I said. But we entered from the outside, from the walkway. "This looks like an interior hallway." "Maybe there's a second entrance," one of the deputies suggested. "An interior stairway or something." We searched the office and found a door marked "Staff Only" behind the front desk. It was locked, but the deputy had a crowbar in his patrol car, and we used it to force the door open. Beyond was a narrow stairway leading up into darkness. The air that wafted down was cold and damp, with that same musty smell I'd noticed throughout the motel, but stronger. I clicked on my flashlight and started up the stairs, the two deputies close behind me. The stairway was steep and creaky, the old wood groaning under our weight. At the top was another door, also unlocked. I pushed it open and found myself in a hallway that matched exactly what I'd seen on the security monitor. Dark red carpet, outdated wallpaper, dim sconce lights. And at the far end, I could see room 214. But this didn't make sense. We'd already been in room 214, entered from the exterior walkway. How could there be a second entrance, an interior hallway that we'd somehow missed? We walked down the hallway slowly, our flashlights sweeping left and right. There were other doors here, other room numbers. Room 212, 213, 214, 215. They were all along the same corridor, arranged in a straight line. But when we'd searched from the outside, the rooms had been arranged in an L shape along the walkway. I stopped at room 214 and tried the handle. Locked. I knocked. "Marcus? If you're in there, it's Bishop. Open up." No response. I looked at the deputies. "This door should open to the same room we searched earlier, but it's locked from this side." We forced the door open. The room beyond was dark. I swept my flashlight inside, expecting to see the same torn-apart room I'd documented earlier. The bed askew, the dresser ransacked, the bathroom door hanging loose. Instead, I saw something completely different. The room was pristine. The bed was made, the sheets crisp and white. The dresser was closed, nothing on top. The bathroom door was intact, hanging straight on its hinges, and sitting on the nightstand was a telephone, the old-fashioned kind with a rotary dial. "What the hell?" one of the deputies whispered. "This isn't the same room." But it had to be. The number on the door was 214, the same room Marcus had checked into, the same room I'd searched less than an hour ago. Yet it looked nothing like what I'd seen before. I stepped inside carefully, my weapon drawn. The room felt different too, colder, quieter, as if sounds were being absorbed by the walls. On the nightstand, next to the telephone, I found a piece of paper. A handwritten note, in Marcus's distinctive scrawl. "Bishop, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here. They knew I was coming. They've been waiting. Room 217. Don't trust the doors." "Yeah, I'm room 217. I looked at the deputies. "Let's move." We exited back into the hallway and moved to room 217, 3 doors down. This door was already open, hanging slightly ajar, just like all the others had been. Beyond was darkness, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the gloom. I entered first, sweeping the room with my light. It was another motel room, similar layout to 214, but in much worse condition. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpet was stained and moldy, and there was a smell of rot in the air. The bed was just a bare mattress, stained with what looked like water damage or worse. And in the corner of the room, sitting in a chair facing the wall, was a figure. "FBI, don't move!" I shouted, my weapon trained on the figure. It didn't move, didn't respond, just sat there, perfectly still, facing the wall. I approached slowly, keeping my distance. I said, "Don't move." Put your hands where I can see them." Still nothing. As I got closer, my flashlight beam fully illuminated the figure, and I realized what I was seeing. It wasn't Marcus. It was a mannequin, the kind you'd see in a department store positioned in the chair. It was wearing a suit, old and moth-eaten, and its plastic hands were resting on its lap. The face was featureless, smooth plastic with no features at all. "What kind of sick joke is this?" one of the deputies said behind me. I was about to respond when I noticed something else. The mannequin's hands weren't just resting on its lap. They were holding something. A piece of paper folded neatly. I approached carefully and took the paper, unfolding it with my gloved hands. It was another note, not in Marcus's handwriting this time, but in neat, precise letters. "Agent Bishop. Your friend is not here. He never was. The rooms move. The numbers change. Trust nothing you see. Leave now while you still can." I read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Who had written this? And what did it mean, "the rooms move"? I turned to show the deputies, but they were no longer behind me. I spun around, my light sweeping the empty room. "Deputies? Where are you?" My voice echoed strangely, as if the room had suddenly gotten larger. I moved back to the door, but when I reached it, I realized I was no longer in room 217. The number on the door, visible from the inside, read 219. That wasn't possible. I'd entered 217 less than a minute ago. How could I now be in a different room? I stepped back into the hallway looking for the deputies, looking for any sign of where I was. But the hallway was different now, too. It was longer, stretching out in both directions, further than it should have been able to go given the size of the building. And the numbers on the doors were all wrong. 223, 225, 228, 231. They weren't in any logical order. I pulled out my phone to call for backup, but there was no signal. Not even one bar. The screen flickered, showing the time, 1:47 a.m., and then went dark. Dead, just like Marcus's phone. "Okay," I said out loud, trying to keep calm. "There's a rational explanation for this. Old building, weird layout, I got turned around. Just need to find the stairs and get back outside." But even as I said it, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with this place. The rooms were changing, shifting, rearranging themselves. Or maybe I was moving through them in a way that defied normal geometry. Either way, I needed to get out. Now. I started down the hallway, looking for the stairs I'd used to come up. But every door I passed was numbered in that same illogical sequence. And behind each door, I could hear sounds. Whispers, footsteps, the creak of bed springs, the hiss of old pipes. Signs of habitation, signs of life. But when I tried the handles, all the doors were locked. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I finally found a stairway. I hurried down, taking the steps 2 at a time, desperate to reach ground level and get outside. When I burst through the door at the bottom, I found myself in the parking lot. The deputies were there, standing next to their patrol cars, looking confused. "Agent Bishop, where the hell did you go? We lost you in that room, and when we went looking for you, the hallway was gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean gone. We went back to the door marked staff only, and it opened into a closet. Just a storage closet with cleaning supplies. No stairway, no interior hallway, nothing. We've been out here for the last 20 minutes trying to figure out where you went." I looked back at the motel. From out here, it looked completely normal. A rundown, 2-story building with an exterior walkway on the 2nd floor. No sign of the interior hallway I'd just been walking through. No sign of the rooms with their impossible numbers. "Did you see anyone else come out?" I asked. "No one. Place is dead quiet. What happened up there?" I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't know what had happened. All I knew was that Marcus was missing. This motel was wrong in ways I couldn't explain, and I needed to figure out what the hell was going on before anyone else disappeared. "We're not done here," I said. "Not by a long shot." The rest of that night was a blur of activity. We sealed off the Palms Motor Lodge as a potential crime scene, called in additional units from the sheriff's office, and set up a command post in the parking lot. I spent hours on the phone with my superiors in Jacksonville, explaining what little I could about the situation. They were skeptical, and I couldn't blame them, but the fact remained that a federal informant had disappeared from this location, and we had evidence he'd been here. By sunrise, we had a full investigative team on site. Crime scene technicians, additional agents from the Jacksonville field office, even a K-9 unit to search for any sign of Marcus. But despite hours of searching, we found nothing beyond what I'd already documented. No additional evidence, no witnesses, no trace of where Marcus had gone. The architecture of the building became a central focus of the investigation. We brought in engineers and building inspectors to map out the motel's layout and identify any hidden spaces or passages. What they found was both mundane and deeply troubling. According to the original building plans filed with Polk County in 1968, the Palms Motor Lodge was a simple 2-story structure with 20 rooms total, 10 on each floor, arranged in an L shape. There was no interior hallway mentioned in the plans. No staff stairway. The only access to the second floor was via exterior stairs at each end of the building. But when the engineers actually measured the building, they found discrepancies. The interior dimensions didn't match the exterior dimensions. There was space, several hundred square feet of it, that couldn't be accounted for. Space that should have been part of the rooms or hallways, but wasn't accessible from any obvious entrance. "It's like someone built a false wall," one of the engineers explained, showing me his measurements on a tablet. "See here? This is the exterior wall of room 214, and this is where our measurements say the interior wall should be. There's a gap of about 8 feet between them. That space has to be somewhere, but we can't find how to access it. Could it be crawl space? Utility access? Not likely. It's too big, and there's no documentation of it in the plans. Plus, when we used thermal imaging, we detected heat signatures in that space. Could be old pipes or electrical, but..." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Or it could be something else." Something else became the focus of our investigation for the next several days. We obtained a warrant to conduct a more invasive search of the property, including permission to break through walls if necessary. What we found confirmed my worst suspicions about this place. Behind the wall of room 214, we discovered a narrow passage, barely 2 feet wide, running parallel to the exterior rooms. It was lined with cheap paneling and lit by a string of bare light bulbs that flickered erratically. The passage connected to a network of hidden corridors and staircases that wound through the building in ways that made no architectural sense. We followed these passages and found more rooms, dozens of them, hidden behind false walls and accessed through concealed doors. Some were furnished like normal motel rooms, complete with beds and furniture. Others were empty, just bare walls and concrete floors. And a few were disturbing, filled with strange objects, outdated electronics, stacks of old newspapers and magazines dating back decades. In one of these hidden rooms, we found something that made my blood run cold. Sitting on a dresser was a collection of driver's licenses, at least 20 of them, all from different people, all from Florida. I recognized one immediately. It belonged to Marcus Holloway. I bagged it as evidence and kept searching. In the drawer beneath where the licenses had been sitting, we found more personal effects: wallets, keys, jewelry, phones, all belonging to different people. All suggesting that Marcus wasn't the first person to disappear from this motel. He was just the latest. We cross-referenced the names on the licenses with missing person reports going back 20 years. Of the 21 IDs we found, 14 belonged to people who had been reported missing in Central Florida between 2003 and 2023. Most had last been seen somewhere along Highway 27. None had ever been found. The case exploded after that. What had started as a simple search for a missing informant became a major investigation into a possible serial kidnapping operation. The FBI's evidence response team took over the scene, cataloging everything we found. We interviewed anyone who might have information about the motel's history: former employees, local business owners, people who lived nearby. What we learned painted a disturbing picture. The Palms Motor Lodge had been in continuous operation since 1968, though ownership had changed hands several times over the decades. The current owner, according to county records, was a holding company based in Miami called Evergreen Properties, LLC. But when we tried to contact them, we hit a dead end. The company existed on paper but had no active offices, no employees we could identify, and no contact information beyond a P.O. box that hadn't been checked in years. The last confirmed manager of the motel was a man named Everett Maddox, who had run the place from 1985 until approximately 2015. But when we tried to locate Maddox, we found he'd died in 2017 from natural causes. His death certificate listed his residence as the Palms Motor Lodge, room 108, one of the ground floor rooms. We searched that room and found it empty, just like most of the others. But we did find something interesting in the office. In a locked filing cabinet, we discovered guest registries going back to 1995, 28 years of handwritten records. And as I'd suspected that first night, all the entries were in the same handwriting. Hundreds of names, thousands of check-ins, all written by the same person. Presumably Everett Maddox, though we'd need a handwriting expert to confirm it. I spent an entire day going through those registries, cross-referencing names with missing person reports and trying to find patterns. What I found was chilling. Of the approximately 3,000 guests who had supposedly checked into the Palms Motor Lodge between 1995 and 2023, at least 47 matched the names and approximate dates of people who had been reported missing in Florida. 47 people. All vanished from this stretch of highway, all last seen near this motel. But here's what didn't make sense. If this was a serial kidnapping operation, where were the bodies? We'd searched every inch of the property, used ground-penetrating radar to scan for burial sites, brought in cadaver dogs to search the surrounding woods. Nothing. No graves, no remains. No forensic evidence of violence beyond the torn-up room 214 where Marcus had checked in. It was as if these people had simply ceased to exist the moment they entered the Palms Motor Lodge. On the fourth day of the investigation, I received a call from an analyst at FBI headquarters in Washington. She'd been reviewing the case file and had found something interesting in the architectural surveys. Agent Bishop, I've been looking at the thermal imaging and structural scans of the motel, and there's something off about the interior spaces. The dimensions keep changing. What do you mean, changing? I mean, the scans we took on day 1 don't match the scans from day 3. The hidden passages you found? They're in different locations now. Rooms that showed up as sealed on Monday are accessible on Wednesday, and some of the spaces that were accessible on Tuesday are now showing as solid walls. I thought about what I'd experienced that first night. The hallways that seemed to shift and change. The room numbers that didn't make sense. The way I'd entered 217 and somehow ended up in 219. You're saying the building is physically changing? I asked, though I could barely believe I was asking such a question. I'm saying the measurements are inconsistent, which either means our equipment is malfunctioning or, she paused, or something very strange is happening with that building's interior structure. I think you need to bring in specialists, engineers who deal with unusual architectural phenomena, maybe even researchers who study anomalous spaces. After that call, I went back to the motel alone. It was late afternoon, the sun starting to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Most of the investigation team had wrapped up for the day, leaving just a few technicians working in the office and a patrol car outside for security. I walked up to the second floor and stood on the walkway, looking at room 214. The door was open, sealed with crime scene tape, but otherwise unchanged. I ducked under the tape and stepped inside. The room looked exactly as it had that first night. Mattress askew, dresser ransacked, bathroom door hanging loose. We'd documented and photographed everything, collected what little evidence there was. But standing here now, in the fading light, I noticed something we'd missed. On the wall opposite the bed, near the ceiling, there was writing. Faint, scratched into the plaster with something sharp. It was hard to see unless the light hit it at just the right angle, which explained why we'd missed it during the initial search. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it directly at the wall. The writing was a list of numbers. Room numbers, I realized. And next to each number was a date: 214, 3/23/23, 2/17, 3/23/23, 2/19, 3/24/23, 2/26, 3/24/23, 2/31, 3/25/23. Today's date was March 27th. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. These weren't old markings, they were fresh. And the handwriting looked like Marcus's. Had Marcus made it back to this room after that first night? Had he been moving through the building, tracking which rooms he'd been in and when? And if so, where was he now? I photographed the writing and sent it to the analysis team. Then I stood there in the empty room, thinking. Marcus had left me a note saying the rooms move, that the numbers change. I'd experienced it myself. But what if it wasn't just perception? What if the building really was changing? Rearranging its interior spaces according to some pattern or logic we didn't understand. I pulled out my notebook and sketched out the room numbers Marcus had written down. 214, 217, 219, 226, 231. There was no obvious pattern at first, but then I noticed something. If you added the digits of each room number together, you got 214 7, 217 is 10, 219 is 12, 26 is 10, 231 is 6. Still no obvious pattern. But what if it wasn't about the sum of the digits? What if it was about the sequence itself? I looked at the gaps between the room numbers. 3, 2, 7, 5. Nothing. I tried other combinations, other mathematical relationships, but nothing clicked. I was missing something, some key that would help me understand how this place worked. As I was puzzling over this, my phone buzzed. A text from Miranda in the operations center. Agent Bishop, we've got something. Building records show the Palms Motor Lodge was built on the site of an older structure. A hospital that burned down in 1967. Might be relevant. A hospital. I texted back. What kind of hospital? Psychiatric facility. State-run. Closed in 1965 after allegations of patient abuse. Building sat empty for 2 years before the fire. That explained a lot. Old psychiatric hospitals had a well-documented history of unusual architecture. Hidden passages for staff to move unseen. Observation rooms. Secure wards with reinforced walls. If the Palms Motor Lodge had been built using some of the old hospital's foundation or infrastructure, it might have inherited those hidden spaces. But it didn't explain the changing layout. It didn't explain how I'd entered one room and ended up in another. And it definitely didn't explain where 47 people had vanished to over the course of 28 years. I decided to try something. I left room 214 and walked down the exterior walkway to the staff-only door that led to the interior stairway. The door was propped open now, maintained that way by the investigation team. I went through and climbed the stairs to the interior hallway. The hallway looked exactly as I remembered it from that first night. Dark red carpet, outdated wallpaper, dim sconce lights. Doors on both sides, each with a room number. But when I checked the numbers, they weren't the same as before. Last time, I'd seen 212, 213, 214, 215 in sequence. Now the numbers read 208, 215, 223, 229. I pulled out my phone and took photos of each door, noting the numbers. Then I walked to the far end of the hallway and found another door marked Exit. When I pushed through it, I found myself in a different stairway from the one I'd used to come up. This one was narrower, darker, with concrete steps instead of wood. I descended carefully, my flashlight beam showing nothing but bare walls and shadows. At the bottom was another door, which opened into what I expected to be the parking lot or maybe the office. Instead, I found myself in another hallway. This one was different from the others. The carpet was green instead of red, the walls were painted instead of papered, and the lighting was brighter, fluorescent tubes running along the ceiling. The doors here had numbers, but they were 3 digits instead of room numbers: 305, 311, 318, 326. The wrong format entirely. These weren't motel rooms, they were something else. I tried the handle of door 305, locked like all the others had been. But through the frosted glass window in the door, I could see movement inside. Shadows passing back and forth. "Hello?" I called out, knocking on the glass. "FBI, is anyone in there?" The shadows stopped moving. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard a voice muffled by the door but clear enough to understand. "Agent Bishop." My heart nearly stopped. I knew that voice. It was Marcus. "Marcus? Marcus, is that you?" "Yeah, it's me, Jesus, Bishop. How did you find me? How did you get down here? Down where? Marcus, where are you?" "I don't know. 3rd floor, maybe? Or basement? I've lost track. But Bishop, you need to get out of here. This place, it's not right. The doors don't lead where they should. The rooms keep changing. I've been trying to find a way out for days, but every time I think I've found an exit, I end up somewhere else in the building." Days. Marcus had been missing for 4 days now. If he'd been trapped in this place the whole time, living in these impossible hallways, it would explain why we hadn't found him. "Marcus, I'm going to get you out. Can you unlock this door from your side?" "I've tried. It won't open. None of them will. I think they're controlled somehow, locked from somewhere central. But Bishop, there's something else. I'm not alone down here. There are others. Other people trapped in other rooms. I can hear them through the walls. Some of them have been here for years." Years. I thought about the missing persons, the licenses we'd found. 47 people over 28 years. How many of them were still alive, trapped in this maze of impossible rooms? "Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to find a way to open these doors. But I need you to tell me everything you know. How did you end up here? What happened that first night?" "I was being followed. I told you that in the text. Blue sedan, 2 people inside. I thought they were connected to the drug ring, so I tried to shake them. Ended up at this motel because it looked abandoned. Figured I could hide out for a few hours. But when I checked in, the clerk, if you can call him that, he knew my name before I told him. Said my room was ready, like he'd been expecting me." "What did this clerk look like?" "Old guy, 60s maybe, thin, pale, didn't make eye contact. Handed me a key and pointed to the stairs. I went up to room 214, And that's when things got weird. The room was wrong. Not like it looked in the photos I'd taken from outside. It was bigger, darker, and there was something in there with me. What do you mean, something? I mean, I wasn't alone. I could hear breathing, movement. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. So I called out, said I was FBI, demanded to be let out. That's when the lights went out. Marcus's voice had taken on a strained quality, like he was reliving a trauma. When the lights came back on, I wasn't in room 214 anymore. I was somewhere else in the building, in a hallway I'd never seen. I'd been trying to find my way out ever since. But every door I open leads to another hallway, another set of rooms. It's like a labyrinth, Bishop, and I think it's designed to keep people in. I was about to respond when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my hand going to my weapon, but there was no one there. The hallway behind me was empty, but I could still hear the footsteps echoing from somewhere distant, getting closer. Marcus, I have to go, but I'm coming back with a team. We're going to tear this place apart until we find you and everyone else. Just hold on. Bishop, wait, but I was already moving, heading back toward the stairway I'd come down. I needed to get outside, needed to brief the team, needed to organize a proper search of these hidden levels. As I climbed the stairs, I could still hear those footsteps, closer now, accompanied by other sounds. Doors opening and closing, whispers in the walls. The building was alive with activity, with presences I couldn't see but could definitely feel. When I burst through the door at the top of the stairs, I expected to be back in the red-carpeted hallway. Instead, I found myself in the parking lot, standing about 20 feet from the motel office. It was fully dark now, the parking lot illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. The patrol car that had been there was gone. The investigation team was gone. I was completely alone. I pulled out my phone. 9:47 p.m. I'd been inside for over 4 hours, though it had felt like minutes, and I had 17 missed calls from Miranda and my supervisor. I called Miranda first. She answered on the first ring. "Agent Bishop, where the hell have you been? We've been trying to reach you for hours. The team said you went up to the second floor and never came back. We searched everywhere. I found Marcus. He's alive, trapped somewhere in the building. Third floor, or maybe basement, I'm not sure. We need to get back in there with a full team and equipment. Cutting tools, thermal imaging, everything." "Bishop, slow down. What third floor? The building only has 2 stories. No, there's more. Hidden levels, connected by staircases. The building is bigger on the inside than it looks from outside. I know how that sounds, but it's true. Marcus has been trapped in there for days, and he says there are others." There was a long pause. Then Miranda said very carefully, "Agent Bishop, we need to pull you off this case. You're not thinking clearly. You've been under a lot of stress. I'm not crazy, Miranda. I found Marcus. I spoke to him through a door on the 3rd floor. He told me what happened. Bishop, listen to me. There is no 3rd floor. The building has been completely mapped. We've used ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, structural scans. There are 2 floors of rooms, some hidden passages, and that's it. There's nowhere else Marcus could be. Then explain how I was just talking to him 5 minutes ago. I can't. But I can tell you that your GPS tracker shows you've been standing in the parking lot for the last 4 hours. Not moving, not going in or out of the building. Just standing in the same spot." I looked down at my phone. The GPS app was open, showing my location as a blue dot in the motel parking lot. And according to the history, I'd been in that exact spot since 5:47 p.m. But that was impossible. I'd been inside the building. I'd climbed stairs, walked through hallways, spoken to Marcus through a locked door. I had photos on my phone to prove it. The room numbers, the scratched writing on the wall. I opened my photo gallery to show Miranda. The photos were gone. All of them. The most recent image in my gallery was from that morning. A shot of the investigation team setting up in the office. Everything I'd photographed in the last 4 hours had vanished. "Bishop, I'm sending someone to pick you up," Miranda said. "You need rest. We'll resume the investigation tomorrow with a fresh team." No. We need to search now. Marcus doesn't have time. "Bishop!" Miranda's voice was sharp. "Stand down. That's an order. We'll resume in the morning." She hung up. I stood there in the empty parking lot staring at the dark bulk of the Palms Motor Lodge, knowing with absolute certainty that Marcus was somewhere inside that building, trapped in rooms that shouldn't exist, in hallways that moved and changed. And no one would believe me. I was about to go back inside anyway, orders be damned, when headlights swept across the parking lot. A Bureau sedan pulled up next to my car, and Agent Harper Monroe got out. Harper was a colleague from Jacksonville, a solid investigator I'd worked with on several cases. "Bishop, you okay?" he asked, approaching with visible concern. "Miranda called me, said you were showing signs of mental stress." "I'm fine. I found Marcus." "Where?" "Inside, hidden levels. The building is bigger than it looks." Harper gave me the same look Miranda probably had when I'd told her. Patient, concerned, skeptical. "Let's take a walk," he said. "Clear your head, then we can talk about what you found." We walked around the motel property, Harper letting me talk while he listened without interruption. I told him everything: the changing hallways, the impossible room numbers, the conversation with Marcus through the locked door, the mysterious clerk Marcus had described, the breathing sounds in the walls, the footsteps that followed but were never attached to anyone visible. When I finished, Harper was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I believe you found something, Bishop. Maybe not what you think you found, but something. This place is definitely wrong. I've been reviewing the evidence all day, and none of it adds up. The architectural inconsistencies, the missing persons, the fact that we found personal effects but no bodies. It's like this motel exists in two states simultaneously, normal and abandoned, occupied and empty. So you believe me?" "I believe something is happening here that doesn't fit our normal investigative framework, and I think Marcus might be in serious danger, wherever he is. But Bishop, you need to consider the possibility that this place is affecting you, affecting your perception. Old buildings can have that effect: toxic mold, carbon monoxide, infrasound from the ventilation system. All of it can cause hallucinations, disorientation, lost time. You think I imagined talking to Marcus? I think you experienced something, and your mind interpreted it as talking to Marcus. But whether that actually happened in physical reality..." He shrugged. "I don't know. And until we figure out what's going on with this building, I think it's best if you keep your distance. Let the tech team handle it. They can go in with sensors and cameras, map everything objectively." He was right, of course. I was too close to this case, too emotionally invested. Marcus wasn't just an informant. He'd become something like a friend over the 18 months we'd worked together. The idea that he was trapped somewhere I couldn't reach was driving me to take risks I normally wouldn't take. But I also knew, with absolute certainty, that I'd spoken to Marcus, that he was alive and trapped in this building, and that if I didn't find him soon, he'd end up like the others. Just another name in a missing persons report, another license in a drawer, another person who vanished from Highway 27 without a trace. "I'll step back," I told Harper. "But keep me informed. Any developments, any findings, I want to know immediately." "Deal. Now, let me give you a ride back to your hotel. You need sleep." I agreed, too exhausted to argue. As we drove away from the Palms Motor Lodge, I looked back at the building in the side mirror. In the darkness, with its broken sign and boarded windows, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to be: an abandoned motel, forgotten by time, slowly crumbling into decay. But I knew better. Inside that innocuous structure was something impossible, something that defied normal physics and logic. And somewhere in its shifting hallways, Marcus Holloway was fighting to survive. I spent the next 2 days on forced leave, ostensibly to rest and recover from what my superiors were calling investigative stress. But I couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hallways, those room numbers that didn't make sense. I heard Marcus's voice through that locked door, desperate and scared. So instead of resting, I researched. I spent hours in the public library, digging through newspaper archives and county records, trying to learn everything I could about the Palms Motor Lodge and the psychiatric hospital that had stood there before. What I found was disturbing. The hospital, called the Polk County Psychiatric Facility, had opened in 1952 as a state-run institution for the mentally ill. But according to newspaper accounts from the 1960s, it had been much more than that. Former staff members who came forward after the facility closed described it as a place where experimental treatments were conducted, often without patient consent or oversight. One article from 1965, published in the Tampa Tribune, included testimony from a former nurse who described the hospital's layout as deliberately confusing. According to her, the building had been designed with multiple redundant corridors and locked sections specifically to disorient patients who attempted to escape. Some wings of the hospital were accessible only through other wings, creating a maze-like structure that made navigation nearly impossible for anyone unfamiliar with the layout. The nurse also described something else that caught my attention. She claimed that toward the end of the hospital's operation, several patients had gone missing within the building itself. They'd been seen going into their rooms or the common areas, but were never seen again. Staff had searched, of course, but the missing patients were never found. The official explanation was that they'd escaped and died in the surrounding wilderness. But the nurse didn't believe that. She thought they were still in the building somewhere, lost in sections that even the staff didn't know about. The hospital had burned in 1967, supposedly an electrical fire that gutted most of the structure. But some of the foundation and lower levels had survived. According to building records, when the Palms Motor Lodge was constructed in 1968, the developers had used the existing foundation where structurally sound, incorporating some of the old hospital's infrastructure into the new motel. That explained the hidden passages, the confusing layout. But it didn't explain the impossible geometry I'd experienced. Buildings didn't change their interior dimensions. Hallways didn't shift and rearrange, not unless. I spent another hour searching for information about architectural anomalies, places where the physical structure seemed to defy normal logic. What I found was mostly pseudoscience and conspiracy theories, but there were a few documented cases of buildings with unusual properties, places where people reported getting lost despite simple layouts, where rooms seemed to be in different locations depending on how you approached them, where the interior space seemed larger than the exterior dimensions allowed. Most of these cases had rational explanations: optical illusions, poor navigation, buildings constructed on multiple levels that confused visitors. But a few remained unexplained, puzzles that architects and investigators had never quite solved. The Winchester Mystery House in California was one example. The House on the Rock in Wisconsin was another. Buildings that had been designed and constructed in unusual ways, often by eccentric owners with specific goals in mind. Had the psychiatric hospital been deliberately designed to confuse? And had that design carried over into the motel built on its ruins? On the third day of my forced leave, I received a call from Harper. "Bishop, you need to get down here. We found something." I was in my car 10 minutes later, making the drive from Jacksonville to Lake Wales in record time. When I arrived at the Palms Motor Lodge, the parking lot was full of vehicles, bureau sedans, sheriff's patrol cars, a large truck from the evidence response team. The motel had been completely cordoned off, crime scene tape stretching around the entire property. Harper met me at the perimeter. "You're technically not supposed to be here, but I figured you'd want to see this." We were doing another sweep of the hidden passages when one of the techs noticed something odd. "Come on." He led me into the building, through the office, and up the staff stairway to the red carpeted hallway I'd walked through 3 days ago. But when we reached the top of the stairs, I could see the hallway had changed again. The room numbers were different, and the layout seemed subtly altered. Doors that had been close together were now farther apart, and vice versa. "Notice anything different?" Harper asked. "The numbers, they've changed." "Exactly. We've been monitoring this hallway with cameras for the past 2 days. And every 12 hours, like clockwork, the room numbers change. Not the physical doors, those stay in the same position. But the numbers themselves, they rearrange. It's like someone is moving them deliberately." He showed me time-lapse footage on his tablet. The hallway, filmed from a fixed camera position. Over the course of 12 hours, the numbers on the doors slowly faded, then reappeared in different configurations. It looked almost like a digital effect, but Harper assured me it was real footage with no manipulation. "We think the numbers are on some kind of rotating mechanism," he explained. "Built into the doors somehow, but we can't figure out the pattern or the purpose. Why would someone design a building where the room numbers constantly change?" "To keep people from finding their way out," I said. "If you can never navigate reliably, if the layout keeps changing, you'd get lost even in a small building." "That's what we thought too, which brings us to what we found today. Follow me." We walked down the hallway to a door marked 205. Harper unlocked it with a master key the evidence team had found in the office, and we stepped inside. The room was empty, no furniture or fixtures, but covering one entire wall was a map, not a normal map. This was a hand-drawn diagram of the motel's interior, showing dozens of rooms and passages that shouldn't have existed based on the building's external dimensions. Hallways that looped back on themselves. Staircases that went both up and down from the same landing. Rooms that connected to other rooms in impossible configurations. And written throughout the diagram, in the margins and along the corridors, were notes in tiny, cramped handwriting. Names, dates, and brief descriptions. M. Harrison, 7303, found in 317, refused to come out. J. Rivera, 112207, disappeared from 214, sounds in walls T. Callahan, 2812, basement level, still calling for help S. Monroe, 91518, third floor, east wing, no response to contact. "We've cross-referenced the names," Harper said quietly. "They all match missing persons from our list. This map was created by someone who was tracking the disappearances. Who made it? We think it was Everett Maddox, the last manager. We found a journal in his room, room 108, that seems to be a continuation of this. He was documenting what he called the movements of the building. According to his writings, he believed the motel was alive in some sense, that it was growing, expanding, creating new spaces that didn't exist before." I stared at the map, trying to make sense of its complexity. Did he explain how that was possible? Not in any way that makes scientific sense, but he was convinced it was connected to the old hospital. He wrote that when they built the motel, they didn't just use the foundation. They incorporated some of the hospital's treatment rooms, specifically the isolation wards. and those wards had been designed by a doctor who was obsessed with spatial disorientation as a form of therapy, a guy named Dr. Lawrence Vance. The name triggered a memory. Vance, same last name as the deputy who called me about Marcus. No relation, we checked. But yeah, weird coincidence. Anyway, Dr. Vance was a pioneer in something he called environmental therapy. The idea was to treat psychiatric conditions by altering patients' perception of space. He designed the hospital's isolation wards as a series of interconnected rooms where nothing was quite where it seemed. Doors that opened to different places depending on which direction you approached from. Hallways that curved in ways that made distances impossible to judge. According to his papers, he believed this kind of spatial confusion could reset disordered minds. Jesus, that's not therapy, that's torture. Yeah, well, this was the 1950s. They did a lot of things back then that we'd consider torture now. But here's the thing. According to Maddox's journal, Dr. Vance's design was so effective at disorienting people that even the staff got lost in those wards. They had to use maps and marked trails just to navigate. And when the hospital closed, they couldn't demolish those sections because they couldn't figure out how they were constructed. The walls didn't connect to anything. The rooms didn't align with the building's structure. So they just sealed them off. And then someone built a motel on top of them. Exactly. And somehow, over the decades, those sealed-off sections started expanding, opening up into the motel itself. Maddox documented it happening. New passages appearing, old passages closing off, room numbers shuffling like a deck of cards. He tried to track it, tried to warn people away, but the motel kept operating, and people kept checking in, and kept disappearing. Harper nodded. We think they're still here, somewhere in these passages. Maddox's last journal entry, dated about 6 months before he died, says he'd found a way into what he called the deep sections, places in the building that were so far from any entrance that people trapped there would never find their way out. He was planning to mount a rescue operation, bring in professional spelunkers and rescue teams, but he never got the chance. Heart attack got him first. I studied the map more carefully, looking for any indication of where these deep sections might be. In the lower left corner, Maddox had drawn what looked like a stairway descending below the first floor. Next to it, he'd written, Subsection 7, Voices heard 3-12-17. M. Holloway? Wait, I said, pointing to the notation. That's dated 6 years ago, but Marcus only went missing 4 days ago. Harper looked at the map, his expression troubled. I know, which either means Maddox made an error or... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. If Maddox had heard someone named M. Holloway 6 years ago, and Marcus had only been missing for 4 days, then either it was a different person with the same name, or something very strange was happening with time inside this building. Show me subsection 7, I said. Show me where that stairway is. We spent the next hour searching the building, using Maddox's map as a guide. The problem was that the map didn't correspond exactly to the building's current layout. Passages that were shown as accessible were now walled off. Staircases that should have been in certain locations were missing. It was as if the building had continued to change since Maddox drew the map. But finally, in a storage closet on the ground floor, we found it. Hidden behind a set of metal shelving was a doorway that had been covered with drywall and painted over. The evidence team had missed it during their initial sweeps because it looked like a solid wall. But when Harper knocked on it, it sounded hollow. We got permission to break through, and within 20 minutes, we'd cut an opening large enough to enter. Beyond was a stairway, narrow and steep, descending into darkness. Unlike the other staircases in the building, this one was clearly original to the old hospital. The walls were exposed brick, and the steps were concrete with metal edging. Subsection 7, Harper said, shining his flashlight down the stairs. According to Maddox's notes, this leads to the hospital's deepest isolation ward, the place where Dr. Vance conducted his most extreme experiments. We need a full team, I said. Rescue equipment, lights, communication gear. If Marcus is down there, I know. But Bishop, you can't go. You're still on leave. Like hell I can't. Marcus is my informant, my responsibility. If anyone's going down there, it's me. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then Harper sighed. Fine, but we do this by the book. Full team, proper equipment, and if I say we pull out immediately. Agreed? Agreed. It took another 2 hours to assemble the team and equipment. By the time we were ready, it was nearly 8 p.m., the sky outside darkening. We had 6 people total. Me, Harper, 2 evidence technicians, and 2 rescue specialists from the Polk County Fire Department. We were equipped with climbing harnesses, rope, powerful flashlights, 2-way radios, and emergency air supplies in case we encountered bad atmosphere at lower levels. At exactly 8 o'clock p.m. we descended. The stairway went down much further than I'd expected. We descended maybe 40 feet, then 50, then 60. The air grew cooler and damper as we went lower, and the brick walls gave way to rough-hewn rock. This wasn't just a basement. This was carved into the bedrock beneath the building. Finally, the stairs ended at a heavy metal door. It was rusted, but intact, with a wheel lock like you'd see on a ship's bulkhead. Harper tried turning it. The mechanism was stiff, but after some effort, it gave way with a groan of metal on metal. Beyond was a corridor. Not the cramped, narrow passage I'd expected, but a wide hallway with high ceilings and doors lining both sides. The walls were painted institutional green, faded and peeling, and the floor was covered in old linoleum tiles. Emergency lights, battery-powered and ancient, cast a weak yellow glow every 20 feet or so. "This is it," Harper said quietly. Subsection 7, the Deep Isolation Ward. We moved down the corridor slowly, checking each door as we passed. Most were locked, but through the small, wire-reinforced windows, we could see empty rooms, hospital rooms, with old beds and medical equipment covered in decades of dust. But some rooms were occupied, or had been. We found personal effects scattered around, clothes, suitcases, shoes, the belongings of people who'd disappeared, and on the walls of several rooms, we found scratched messages. Desperate pleas. Help me. 2009. Can't find the way out. How long have I been here? The dates ranged from 2003 to 2022. Nearly 20 years of messages, left by people who'd somehow ended up trapped in this place. But there were no bodies, no remains. Just empty rooms with abandoned belongings. We continued deeper into the subsection, following the corridor as it turned and branched. The architecture was intentionally disorienting, just as Harper had described. Corridors that seemed to curve in impossible directions. Doors that opened onto rooms that shouldn't have fit within the building's footprint. At one point, we passed a door labeled 317, and then, 30 feet later, passed another door with the same number. "The rooms are repeating," one of the technicians said. "Or maybe we're moving in a circle." "No," Harper said, checking his GPS unit. "We're still heading south, or at least what should be south, but the signal is weak down here. Could be interference from the rock." After maybe an hour of searching, we heard it. A voice, faint and distant, calling out. Not words exactly, but the sound of someone in distress. We followed the sound, moving quickly now, our flashlight sweeping across the peeling walls and abandoned equipment. The voice led us to a door marked 305, the same number I'd seen in the green carpeted hallway where I'd spoken to Marcus. Harper tried the handle. Locked, just like before. But unlike before, we had tools. One of the rescue specialists used a pry bar on the lock mechanism, and after a few minutes of work, the door swung open. Inside was a hospital room, furnished with an old metal bed frame and a small desk. And sitting on the bed, looking exhausted and confused but very much alive, was Marcus Holloway. "Bishop," he said, his voice hoarse, "is that really you? Am I hallucinating again?" "It's me, Marcus. We found you. Come on, let's get you out of here." As we helped Marcus to his feet, he kept looking around the room as if he couldn't quite believe we were there. "I've been here for days," he said. "Or maybe longer. I can't tell anymore. Time moves weird down here. Sometimes I sleep and wake up and it feels like only minutes have passed. Other times, I'm awake for what feels like days without getting tired." "How did you end up down here?" Harper asked. "I was in room 214, then room 217, then, I don't know. I kept trying doors, trying to find an exit. Each door led to another hallway, another set of rooms. Eventually, I ended up here. I could hear other people sometimes, voices through the walls, but I never saw anyone." He paused. "Am I the only one you found?" "So far," I said. "But we're going to keep searching. There are others down here, we know that now." We made our way back to the main corridor, Marcus supported between two of the rescue specialists. He was weak and dehydrated, but physically okay. As we retraced our steps toward the stairway, I noticed something strange. The room numbers were different from when we'd come through earlier. Doors that had been marked 232 were now marked 195. The corridor itself seemed slightly wider, and the paint on the walls was a different shade of green. "The building's shifting again," Harper said quietly. "We need to move fast." We picked up the pace, but the corridor seemed to be getting longer. The stairway that we'd reached after maybe 15 minutes of walking was now nowhere in sight after 20 minutes, and the doors we passed were numbered in sequences that made no sense, jumping from 400s to 100s to 700s with no logic. "We're lost," one of the technicians said, his voice tight with panic. "We need to go back." "There is no back," Harper said. "The corridor behind us has already changed. We keep moving forward. There has to be an exit." We walked for another 30 minutes, the corridor seeming to extend infinitely in both directions. Marcus was fading, his legs giving out, and we had to stop to give him water and rest. As we sat in that impossible hallway, surrounded by doors that led to abandoned rooms, I thought about Dr. Vance's experiments. This was his masterpiece. A space so disorienting that even with maps and equipment and training, we couldn't find our way out. Then I remembered something Marcus had said when I'd spoken to him through the door. The doors were controlled somehow, locked from somewhere central. If we could find that central location, maybe we could unlock all the doors at once, find the exit. "The control room," I said. "There has to be a control room somewhere, a place where they monitored the isolation wards." Harper looked at Maddox's map, which we'd photographed and brought with us. Near the center of subsection 7, he'd drawn a small square labeled Observation. "Here," Harper said. "We need to find this room. It should be near the center of the subsection." Using the map as a guide, imperfect as it was, we navigated toward what we hoped was the center of the ward. The doors we passed now were marked with letters instead of numbers. A, F, M, R. No pattern, no logic. But after what felt like hours, we found a door marked Observation, in faded stenciled letters. Harper tried the handle. Unlocked. We entered cautiously, flashlights sweeping the interior. The observation room was exactly what I'd hoped for. A central monitoring station with old CRT monitors showing various rooms and corridors throughout the subsection. Most of the monitors were dark, but a few were still functioning. powered by some ancient electrical system that had somehow survived decades of neglect. And on a desk in the center of the room, we found something that made my blood run cold. A logbook similar to the guest registries we'd found in the motel office, but this one documented patients, not guests. Entries going back to the 1950s, listing names, admission dates, room assignments, and treatment notes in cramped medical handwriting. The last few pages of the logbook were different. The handwriting was newer, and instead of patient names, it listed missing persons. The same names we'd found on the licenses in the motel room. And next to each name was a room number and a status. M. Harrison, room 3117. Non-responsive, J. Rivera, room 214A, relocated. T. Callahan, room B9, voice contact only. And at the bottom of the page, the most recent entry, M. Holloway, room 305, extracted. Extracted, Harper read. Someone's been keeping records. Someone knows what's happening down here. We searched the observation room thoroughly and found what we were looking for, a control panel with switches labeled for each section of the ward. Most were in the locked position. I started flipping switches, one after another, hearing distant clicks and hums as locks throughout the subsection disengaged. And then, on one of the functioning monitors, I saw movement, a door opening in one of the distant corridors, and a figure emerging, thin, ragged, moving with the uncertain steps of someone who'd been locked up for a very long time. "There's someone else," I said, pointing to the monitor. "We need to find them." We spent the next hour systematically searching the now unlocked rooms, following the echoing sounds of doors opening throughout the subsection. We found 3 more people. A woman named Jessica Rivera, who'd been missing since 2007, a man named Thomas Callahan, who disappeared in 2012, and an elderly man who couldn't remember his own name, but who we later identified as Michael Harrison from a 2003 missing person report. All 3 were dehydrated, confused, and suffering from various degrees of psychological trauma. But they were alive. Against all odds, they'd survived years in this place, sustained by what? There was no food in the rooms, no water sources we could find. Yet they were alive. We got them to the observation room, where the rescue specialists began administering first aid and water. And that's when one of the monitors showed something that made us all freeze. On the screen labeled Main Access, we could see the stairway we'd used to descend into subsection 7. But there was someone there. A figure, standing at the top of the stairs, looking down into the darkness. It was hard to make out details on the grainy monitor, but the figure appeared to be wearing old-fashioned clothing, a dark suit and hat, like someone from the 1950s or 60s. As we watched, the figure began descending the stairs, moving slowly, deliberately, heading toward us. "We need to leave," Harper said. "Now." We gathered the survivors and moved out of the observation room, Harper leading the way with Maddox's map. But the corridor had changed again. The path that should have led back to the main stairway was now blocked by a wall that hadn't been there before. And behind us we could hear footsteps echoing through the subsection. The figure from the monitor getting closer. We tried other routes, other doors, but each path led us deeper into the maze rather than out of it. The subsection seemed to be closing in around us, corridors contracting, doors locking themselves even as we watched. And always those footsteps behind us, steady and patient, never hurrying but never stopping. Finally, we found ourselves in a dead-end corridor with only one door at the end. The door was marked with a symbol instead of a number, a medical caduceus. Harper tried the handle. It opened. Beyond was a room unlike any we'd seen so far. It was an office, preserved exactly as it must have looked in the 1960s. A large mahogany desk, filing cabinets along one wall, medical equipment on shelves. and on the desk, a nameplate. Dr. Lawrence Vance, Chief of Psychiatry. We had found Dr. Vance's office. The man who'd designed this nightmare. "Look," one of the technicians said, pointing to the filing cabinets. "Patient files." We searched quickly, knowing we didn't have much time. The footsteps were getting louder, closer. In the filing cabinets, we found decades of patient records, documenting Dr. Vance's experiments in spatial disorientation therapy. The records were meticulous, clinical, describing in cold scientific language how patients responded to being lost in the isolation wards. How some adapted, learning to navigate the changing corridors. How others broke down, refusing to leave their rooms even when doors were unlocked. And in the bottom drawer, we found something that changed everything. A set of blueprints, showing not just subsection 7, but an entire network of passages and rooms extending far beyond what we'd seen. Level after level, going down into the bedrock. And written in Dr. Vance's handwriting across the top. Phase 3 expansion. Unlimited therapeutic potential. He was still building, Harper said, staring at the blueprints. When the hospital closed, he didn't stop. He kept expanding the subsection, creating more and more space. That's why people keep disappearing. They're falling into sections that are still growing, still changing. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. We all turned, weapons drawn, flashlights aimed at the entrance. The door opened slowly. The figure that entered wasn't what I'd expected. It was a man, elderly but not impossibly old. He was wearing the dark suit and hat I'd seen on the monitor, but up close, I could see they were just ordinary clothes, dated but not ancient. And his face, while pale and thin, was human. Normal. "Dr. Vance?" Harper asked, though it was impossible. Vance would have been over 90 years old if he was still alive, and this man looked maybe 70. The man smiled slightly. "No, I'm Dr. Vance's last patient. My name is Robert Everett. I've been maintaining his work since he passed in 1965. He looked around the office, his expression almost wistful. He was a visionary, you know. He understood that space itself could be therapeutic, that by controlling how people move through a building, you could influence their minds, heal their disorders. "You're kidnapping people," I said, "trapping them in this place." "I'm continuing the experiment," Robert said calmly. "The motel provides subjects. They check in willingly after all. And down here in Dr. Vance's subsection, they experience true spatial therapy. Some find their way out eventually. Others adapt, become part of the architecture." He gestured vaguely. "It's fascinating work, really. The building grows with each new subject, creating new possibilities, new configurations." "You're insane," Harper said. "Perhaps. But tell me, Agent, now that you've been down here, now that you've experienced the subsection yourself, can you honestly say you understand how to leave? Can you point to the exit with confidence?" Robert's smile widened. "You're part of the experiment now, all of you. The question is whether you'll find your way out, or whether you'll join the others." He turned and walked out of the office. We followed, but when we reached the corridor, he was gone. Simply vanished, as if the building had absorbed him. "This place is his," Harper said quietly. "He knows every passage, every shift. He can move through it like we move through normal space. Then we use the blueprints," I said. "They show the original structure before the expansion. If we can find our way back to the original hospital section, we should be able to find the main stairway." We used the blueprints as a guide, marking our path on the map as we went. The corridors fought us every step of the way, shifting and changing, trying to redirect us deeper into the subsection. But by marking our path and refusing to deviate, by moving deliberately and carefully, we slowly made progress toward what the blueprints showed as the main access point. It took hours. The survivors we'd found were exhausted, barely able to walk. Marcus had to be carried part of the way. But eventually, after what felt like days but was probably only 6 or 7 hours, we saw it. The heavy metal door at the bottom of the stairs. We practically ran the last 100 feet, desperate to escape the subsection before it could shift again. Harper yanked open the door, and we stumbled through, climbing the stairs as fast as we could while carrying the survivors. Up and up, the brick walls gradually giving way to the familiar drywall and studs of the motel's ground floor. When we finally emerged through the storage closet into the motel proper, the sunlight streaming through the windows was blinding. It was morning. We'd been down there all night. The command post in the parking lot erupted into activity when we came out. EMTs rushed forward to take care of the survivors. My supervisor was there, furious that I'd gone into the subsection against orders, but relieved we'd made it out alive. As I sat in an ambulance, being checked for injuries and dehydration, I watched the motel. The Palms Motor Lodge looked exactly as it always had. A run-down, abandoned building slowly crumbling into decay. You'd never know that beneath it was a maze of impossible corridors, still growing, still waiting for new subjects. "We're sealing it," Harper said, coming to sit next to me. "Filling in the stairways with concrete, boarding up every entrance we can find. The building is now officially condemned. No one will be allowed inside." "What about Robert Everett? He's still down there." "We'll post guards. If he comes out, we'll arrest him. But Bishop..." Harper paused. "I don't think he's coming out. I think he's been down there so long he's part of the subsection now. Like he said, part of the architecture." I nodded. I'd reached the same conclusion. Robert Everett had spent decades in Dr. Vance's isolation ward, first as a patient and then as its caretaker. The subsection had shaped his mind just as surely as he'd shaped its passages. He belonged to it now, and it belonged to him. Over the next week, the survivors were hospitalized and debriefed. Their stories were remarkably consistent. They'd checked into the motel, entered their rooms, and found themselves unable to leave. Hours became days, days became years, all spent wandering through changing corridors, trapped in a building that grew around them like a living thing. Psychological evaluations showed they were all suffering from severe trauma, disorientation, and what the doctors called spatial memory disruption. They couldn't reliably navigate even simple buildings without getting lost. The subsection had permanently altered their perception of space. Marcus recovered physically, but mentally he was changed. He resigned as an informant, saying he could never go into another building without feeling like the walls might shift around him. I couldn't blame him. I felt the same way. The case was officially closed 3 months later. The Palms Motor Lodge was demolished, or at least the above-ground portion was. The subsection was left alone, its entrances sealed with concrete and steel. The property was declared a hazardous site, and a fence was erected around the entire lot. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about those blueprints. About Dr. Vance's Phase 3 expansion plan, his vision of unlimited therapeutic potential, and I think about Robert Everett, still down there in the darkness, maintaining the experiment, waiting for new subjects who will never come. The building may be sealed, but I don't think it's finished. I think it's still growing, still expanding in ways we can't measure or understand. Creating new rooms, new corridors, new configurations, preparing itself for the day when someone inevitably finds a way back in. Because that's the thing about mazes, they're always harder to leave than to enter. And the Palms Motor Lodge was the most perfect maze ever designed. 3 weeks after the demolition of the Palms Motor Lodge, I received a package at my office in Jacksonville. There was no return address, just a postmark from Polk County. Inside was a small envelope containing a single key, the old-fashioned kind, brass with a worn plastic tag attached. The tag was stamped with a number, 214. Attached to the key was a note written in neat, precise handwriting that I recognized immediately. Robert Everett's handwriting. Agent Bishop, you didn't find everyone. Some prefer to stay. The subsection provides what they need: infinity, endless possibility, escape from linear existence. Dr. Vance understood that some minds can't function in normal space. They need somewhere larger, somewhere that changes. I've kept this place for them, for us. You can seal the entrances, but you can't seal the space itself. It exists independent of your measurements and maps. It's always been here beneath the surface, waiting. I showed the note to Harper. He wanted to mount another expedition into the subsection, to search for anyone we might have missed. But when we returned to the property, we found something impossible. The lot was empty, completely empty. The foundation, the sealed entrances, even the fence we'd erected, all of it was gone. In its place was just an empty stretch of land covered in scrub grass and palmetto bushes, as if the motel had never existed. The county records still showed the property's history, the demolition permits, the hazard warnings, all the documentation of what we'd found. But physically, there was no trace of the building. It was as if it had been erased from reality. We brought in ground-penetrating radar, searched for any sign of the subsection beneath the surface. The equipment showed nothing but undisturbed soil and bedrock. No voids, no passages, no evidence of Dr. Vance's isolation ward. "How is that possible?" Harper asked. "We were here 3 weeks ago. We went down into that subsection. We brought people out." "I don't know," I said. And I didn't. The building couldn't have been removed so completely, so quickly. Yet there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. We interviewed the survivors again, hoping they could provide some explanation. But their memories were already fading. Jessica Rivera remembered being trapped somewhere dark for a long time, but couldn't recall details about the corridors or the rooms. Thomas Callahan remembered voices in walls, but not much else. Even Marcus, whose memory was usually sharp, found himself struggling to describe what he'd experienced. "It's like trying to remember a dream," he told me during one of our follow-up meetings. "I know I was there, I know something happened, but the specifics are slipping away. Sometimes I wonder if any of it was real." I understood what he meant. My own memories of the subsection were becoming hazy, dreamlike. The impossible geometry, the changing corridors, Robert Everett's calm explanation of the ongoing experiment, all of it felt less solid with each passing day, as if my mind was refusing to hold on to memories that didn't make sense. But I still had the key. That was real, physical, undeniable. And sometimes, late at night, I take it out and look at the number stamped on the tag. 214. The room Marcus had checked into. The room where everything had started. 2 months after the building's disappearance, I received another note. This one came through internal mail at the FBI office, passed through several hands before reaching my desk. No one could identify who had originally submitted it. The handwriting was different this time. Shaky. Uncertain. "Agent Bishop, I'm still here. We're all still here. The subsection didn't disappear. You just can't see it anymore, but we can. Those of us who lived in it long enough, we can still find the doors. They're everywhere once you know how to look. In old buildings, in basements, in abandoned places along forgotten highways. Dr. Vance's design spread beyond the original hospital, beyond the motel. It's a network now, connecting spaces that shouldn't connect. And it's growing. MH Marcus Holloway." But Marcus was in witness protection now, relocated to somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. How could he have sent this note? I called his handler, asked if Marcus had been in Florida recently. The answer was no. Marcus hadn't left his new city in weeks. He'd been meeting regularly with his therapist, attending his check-ins, following all the protocols. So, who had sent the note? I didn't get an answer to that question. But 3 months later, I got another one. And 3 months after that, another. Always the same message. We're still here. The subsection is still growing. The doors are everywhere. After the 5th note, I stopped opening them. I put them in a locked drawer in my desk and tried to forget about them. I threw the key, room 214, into the St. Johns River one night after too many drinks, watching it disappear into the dark water. But forgetting wasn't easy, because I started noticing things. Small things at first. Doors in buildings that opened onto rooms that seemed too large for the space they occupied. Hallways in government buildings that curved in ways that made you lose track of which direction you were heading. Room numbers in hotels that jumped from 214 to 217, skipping 2 and 15 and 2 and 16 with no explanation. And sometimes, late at night when I was working alone in the office, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, steady, patient footsteps that would stop just outside my door. But when I checked, no one was there. Harper and I met occasionally to discuss the case, though we were both officially discouraged from talking about it. The Bureau had classified the entire investigation, sealed the records, and instructed everyone involved to move on. Too many unexplained elements, too many loose ends that couldn't be tied up in a way that made sense in a case file. "Do you ever wonder where they really are?" Harper asked me during one of these meetings. "The people we found in the subsection? Jessica, Thomas, Michael. They were checked into normal hospitals, given normal treatment. But sometimes I look at them and I think, are they really here? Or are they still in that place, and we're just seeing some kind of projection?" I had wondered the same thing. The survivors had never fully returned to normal life. They were physically present but somehow absent, as if part of them was still wandering those changing corridors. And sometimes, when I visited them, I'd catch them staring at walls or doors with an expression of recognition, as if they could see something the rest of us couldn't. Marcus was the worst. 6 months after his rescue, his therapist reported that he'd started drawing maps. Compulsively, obsessively, filling notebook after notebook with intricate diagrams of impossible architecture. Rooms that overlapped, corridors that looped back on themselves, staircases that ascended and descended simultaneously. When I visited him, he showed me some of the maps. They were disturbingly similar to the diagrams we'd found in Maddox's room and Dr. Vance's office. The same impossible geometry, the same disorienting layouts. "I can still see it," Marcus told me. "The subsection. It's not gone, Bishop. It's just hidden. And it's bigger now than when we were there. It's spread to other buildings, other places. Sometimes I walk into a room and I just know, that it's connected to the subsection. That if I went through the right door, I'd be back in those corridors." "Have you tried?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Once, there was a door in my apartment building, in the basement, that felt wrong, like it was vibrating on some frequency I could barely perceive. I opened it, and beyond was a hallway that wasn't on the building plans. It looked just like the subsection. Same carpet, same lights, same smell. He paused. I almost went in, almost stepped through. But I remembered what you said about Everett, about how he became part of the architecture. I didn't want that to happen to me. You did the right thing. Did I? Marcus looked at me intently. Sometimes I think I made a mistake. Sometimes I think the only way to escape the subsection is to fully enter it, to understand its logic completely. Fighting it, trying to navigate it with normal geometry and normal reasoning, that's what traps you. But if you accepted it, embraced it. He didn't finish. I left that meeting deeply troubled. Marcus was deteriorating mentally, falling back into the same spatial confusion we'd rescued him from. His therapist said it was PTSD, that the trauma of being trapped in the subsection had permanently damaged his ability to process architectural space normally. But I wasn't so sure. I thought maybe the subsection had marked him, changed him in ways that couldn't be reversed. A year after the motel's disappearance, I was driving through Central Florida on another case. The route took me along Highway 27, past the spot where the Palms Motor Lodge had stood. I told myself I was just passing through, that I had no intention of stopping. But when I reached the location, I pulled over. The lot was still empty, just scrub grass and palmetto bushes. A historical marker had been placed at the site, one of those standard Florida plaques that dot the highways, commemorating forgotten pieces of local history. Site of Polk County Psychiatric Facility, 1952-1965, and Palms Motor Lodge, 1968 to 2023. Both structures served the community before being demolished due to structural concerns. This area now preserved as county green space. That was all. No mention of Dr. Vance's experiments. No acknowledgement of the people who'd disappeared here. Just a bland historical note that erased decades of horror with a few sanitized sentences. I was about to get back in my car when I noticed something. At the edge of the lot, partially hidden by palmetto bushes, was a door. Just a door, standing upright with no walls or building attached to it. It looked old, painted industrial green, with a wire-reinforced window and a number stenciled on it, 214. I approached slowly, half convinced it was a hallucination. But it was real. Solid wood, rusty hinges, the number clearly visible. I tried the handle, locked. Through the wire-reinforced window, I could see what looked like a corridor beyond. Not the empty Florida scrubland that should have been there, but an interior hallway. Red carpet, outdated wallpaper, dim sconce lights. The subsection, still here, still waiting. I pulled out my phone to call Harper, but there was no signal. I walked back to my car, thinking I'd drive to the nearest town and report this. But when I looked back at where the door had been, it was gone. Nothing but palmetto bushes and scrub grass. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty lot, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the door. But I knew I hadn't. The subsection was still here, still existing in whatever impossible space Dr. Vance had created for it. The physical building was gone, but the geometry remained. A maze built not of walls and doors, but of folded space, accessible only to those who'd experienced it, who carried its mark. That was 2 years ago. I've driven past the site dozens of times since then, but I've never seen the door again. Maybe it only appears to certain people at certain times. Or maybe I've gotten better at not seeing it, at training my mind to ignore the impossible. But I still get the notes. Once every few months, a new message appears on my desk. Different handwriting each time, different claims about who's sending it. Sometimes it's signed MH, sometimes JR or TC or other initials I don't recognize. Always the same message, though. The subsection is still here, still growing, still waiting. I've stopped trying to investigate. The Bureau won't sanction any more resources for a case they consider closed. Harper was transferred to the Atlanta office, and we've lost touch. The survivors from the subsection have mostly disappeared again. Not literally, but practically. They've withdrawn from normal society, stopped responding to check-ins, moved to locations unknown. Only Marcus maintains occasional contact. He sends postcards from different cities, always with the same message. Found another door. Didn't go through. Yet, I keep the postcards in my desk drawer next to the unopened notes. Evidence of something that officially never happened. Memories of a place that technically doesn't exist. Late at night sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear those footsteps again. Slow and patient, moving through spaces that shouldn't be there. And I think about Dr. Vance's vision, unlimited therapeutic potential, architecture that transcends normal dimensions, space that grows and changes according to its own logic. He failed as a doctor. His experiments caused more harm than they ever cured. But as an architect, as a creator of impossible spaces, he succeeded beyond his wildest ambitions. The subsection survived the hospital's closure, survived the motel's construction and demolition, survived every attempt to seal it or forget it. It's still out there, beneath the surface of Florida, spreading through abandoned buildings and forgotten corners, creating its endless maze of shifting corridors, waiting for new subjects, waiting for people like Marcus, like Jessica and Thomas and Michael, people who got lost once and can never quite find their way back. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I'm one of them. If that night in the subsection changed me in ways I don't fully understand. If some part of me is still down there, walking those impossible hallways, turning doorknobs that lead nowhere and everywhere. There's no way to know for certain. The subsection doesn't leave marks you can see. It works subtly, changing perception rather than reality. Or maybe it changes reality by changing perception. It's hard to tell the difference when you're dealing with impossible architecture. All I know is that I can't forget it. The Palms Motor Lodge, the isolation ward, Dr. Vance's experiment, Robert Everett's patient maintenance. It's all still there in my mind, as clear and immediate as when I first experienced it. And unlike the survivors whose memories faded, mine remain sharp, detailed, permanent. Maybe that's my mark. Maybe that's how I know the subsection touched me. I carry room 214's key in my pocket again. I fished it out of the river 3 months after I threw it in, found it sitting on my desk one morning with no explanation. I could throw it away again, bury it, destroy it. But I know it wouldn't matter. The subsection would just return it, place it somewhere I'd eventually find it. Because that's what I finally understand, after all this time. The subsection doesn't trap people by locking doors. It traps them by showing them something they can't unsee, a way of existing that normal architecture doesn't allow, a freedom from linear space and sequential time that's simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Robert Everett chose to stay. Maybe Marcus will eventually choose the same thing. Maybe they all will, one by one, finding those hidden doors and stepping through into a space that makes more sense to them than the normal world ever did. As for me, I'm still deciding, still carrying that key, still noticing the wrong doors and impossible hallways, still receiving those notes that say, "Come back, the subsection is waiting, you belong here." And late at night, when I hear those patient footsteps in the hallway, I have to resist the urge to open my door and follow them, to see where they lead, to find out if the subsection has a room waiting for me, numbered and ready. Room 214 maybe, or 217, or 305, or any of the infinite rooms in that endless, growing maze beneath Florida's surface. The case file says the investigation is closed, the building demolished, the threat eliminated, the survivors rescued. But I know the truth. The Palms Motor Lodge was never just a building. It was a door, an entrance to something larger, something that was always there and always will be. And once you've seen it, once you've walked its corridors and felt its impossible geometries reshape your understanding of space, you can never fully leave. Part of you remains there forever. wandering those changing hallways, looking for exits that might not exist, looking for room 214 where it all began, where maybe, eventually, it will all end.